He trailed her old car through the rain, convinced she was betraying the justice system. When she stopped at a food bank to get dinner for 3 identical 4-year-old boys, his gavel of judgment shattered. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The penthouse apartment in Chicago sparkled with the city's nocturnal glow reflecting off Lake Michigan. Thomas Hartwell, 32, adjusted the Windsor knot of his navy silk tie, a gift from his mother when Harvard Law had accepted him. Coming from 3 generations of Boston legal royalty, Thomas stood mere steps away from a federal judgeship nomination, the youngest in decades. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline created a tapestry of light and shadow, the perfect backdrop for his meticulously curated life. His Patek Philippe watch showed 7:35. The senator would arrive at 8. Everything was proceeding according to plan, until the doorbell rang 25 minutes early. Thomas frowned. Senator Wilson was never early. He crossed the Italian marble floor, straightening his custom-tailored jacket before opening the door. It wasn't the senator. "Jasmine?" Thomas's voice betrayed surprise but quickly recalibrated to its usual controlled tone. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." Jasmine Williams stood in the hallway, her 24-year-old frame visibly tense in a simple white dress, purchased specifically for a dinner that would never happen. Her dark skin contrasted against the fabric in a way that Thomas had once called striking. Her hands trembled slightly. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "It's important." Thomas glanced at his watch again. "I have the senator arriving in 20 minutes. Perhaps tomorrow would be—" "It can't wait." Jasmine's eyes held a determination that made Thomas step aside, allowing her into the penthouse. She'd been here many times over their 10-month relationship, yet tonight she looked at the space as if seeing it anew, the leather sectional that cost more than her annual salary, the abstract paintings acquired from galleries in New York, the bar stocked with spirits older than she was. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" Thomas asked, walking to the bar. He needed a drink suddenly. Jasmine remained standing, clutching her small purse with both hands. "I'm pregnant." The crystal tumbler paused halfway to the whiskey decanter. Thomas set it down carefully. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice calculated in its control. Jasmine nodded, finally sitting on the edge of the Italian leather sofa. She opened her purse and pulled out a pregnancy test. "I took 3 tests. I'm 5 months along, Thomas." "5 months?" His composure slipped momentarily. "That's impossible. We've been careful." "Not that night after the charity ball," Jasmine replied quietly. "You said you'd bought the tickets to impress Judge Calloway, and—" "Shut up!" Thomas snapped, knocking over the empty tumbler. It rolled across the bar top before he caught it. "Are you telling me your situation is my responsibility?" "Our responsibility," Jasmine corrected, her voice firm despite the tremor in her lower lip. "I know we didn't plan this, but we can make it work. I can keep working until the birth and then—" Thomas laughed, a humorless sound that froze Jasmine's heart. "Let me clarify something for you, Jasmine." He poured whiskey into the glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "I'm weeks away from a federal judicial nomination. My family has connections dating back to the first judges in Massachusetts. Do you really think I'd throw all that away for a waitress from the South Side who hasn't even finished high school?" The words hit Jasmine like a slap. For 10 months, Thomas had sworn her background didn't matter, that he admired her determination to resume her education while working 2 jobs. "You said you loved me," she whispered, tears finally falling. Thomas rolled his eyes, taking a long sip of whiskey. One says many things in the heat of the moment. He walked to the mahogany desk in the corner of the room, opened the drawer, and retrieved an envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table between them. $5,000. That should cover your problem." Jasmine looked at the envelope as if it were a snake poised to strike. "I don't want your money. I want you to take responsibility for your child." "Children?" Thomas corrected with a cold smile. "The doctor said something about multiple heartbeats. Triplets, apparently." The floor seemed to disappear beneath Jasmine. Triplets. The word echoed in her mind like a distant bell. You knew? For how long?" "Your doctor's secretary works for a friend of mine. Medical confidentiality is an illusion in circles like mine, dear." Jasmine stood up, shaking. "Thomas, please, there are children." "No, Jasmine," he replied, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "They're your children. Someone like you would never belong in my world. A black girl from South Side with an incomplete high school education would be an unbearable burden to my legal career, so do us both a favor and disappear." He walked to the door and opened it. "I have a meeting with Senator Wilson in 20 minutes. I won't be here when you leave, and I'd prefer you not be here when I return. You can't just discard me like this." "I already have. The money is generous considering the circumstances. Use it wisely." The door closed with a soft click, but to Jasmine, it sounded like a judge's gavel sealing her sentence. She collapsed onto the sofa, hugging her belly, 3 tiny lives pulsing inside her, unaware of the cruel world awaiting them. After 10 minutes of silent tears, Jasmine stood. She left the money on the table, too proud to take it. Then, staring at the envelope, reality crashed down. Pride wouldn't feed 3 babies. Pride wouldn't pay for doctor visits. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. With shaking hands, she took the envelope and walked out of Thomas Hartwell's life. 2 weeks later, Jasmine stared at the eviction notice on her apartment door. The building manager had been apologetic but firm. Her rent was 2 weeks overdue, and the 3-day grace period had expired. Inside, she sat on her bed, counting Thomas's $5,000, now her only security for 3 lives depending on her. Her dismissal from the courthouse had come suddenly. Staffing reduction, they'd said, but she'd seen Thomas's influence behind it. The head clerk couldn't meet her eyes while delivering the news. Without that income, her small apartment's rent became impossible. Jasmine looked around the studio apartment she'd called home for 2 years. Neat and modest, it represented everything she'd worked for since leaving her mother's chaotic house at 18. Now, at 24 and pregnant with triplets, she faced starting over with nothing. She began packing, sorting her possessions into 3 piles: necessities, items to sell, and things to discard. By evening, her life had been reduced to a single suitcase of clothes and a small box of personal items. Everything else, her secondhand furniture, her small television, her collection of borrowed books she'd been reading to prepare for her GED, was either sold to neighbors or left behind. The next morning, Jasmine called her cousin in Cleveland. The conversation was brief and uncomfortable. "I need a place to stay just until I can find work," Jasmine explained, not mentioning the pregnancy. "How long?" her cousin asked, the reluctance clear in her voice. "A couple of weeks? Maybe a month?" A sigh. "All right, but my place is tiny." Jasmine closed her eyes in relief. "Thank you. I'll be there tomorrow." At the bus station, Jasmine bought a one-way ticket to Cleveland with cash from her sold possessions. Thomas's money remained untouched in an envelope inside her bra, emergency funds for the babies. As she waited for boarding, a newspaper on a nearby seat caught her attention. The headline read, "Rising Star. Boston lawyer Thomas Hartwell expected to receive federal judgeship." Jasmine picked up the paper, staring at Thomas's smiling face. He looked confident, assured, every inch the success story. In the photo, he stood beside Senator Wilson, the man who had been scheduled to arrive at his apartment the night everything fell apart. "Final boarding call for Cleveland." The announcement came over the speakers. Jasmine left the newspaper behind and boarded the bus, her hand instinctively cradling her growing belly. As the bus pulled away from the station, she watched Chicago's skyline grow smaller through the window. The city where she'd met Thomas, where she'd fallen in love, where she'd been abandoned, disappeared into the distance. In her pocket, She carried the copy of her medical records confirming the triplets. 3 identical heartbeats. 3 lives growing inside her. 3 reasons to never give up. The bus ride to Cleveland stretched for nearly 6 hours. Sitting near the back, Jasmine watched the Midwestern landscape roll by. First Chicago's sprawling suburbs, then the industrial zones of northern Indiana, finally the forests and fields of Ohio. Each mile carried her further from her old life and closer to an uncertain future. Her cousin's text had been clear. "I can offer the couch for a while. That's it." Not the warmest welcome, but better than nothing. Jasmine had never been close with her extended family. Her mother's addiction issues had created rifts that spanned generations. This cousin, Latonia, was one of the few who still answered her calls. The Cleveland bus station was smaller than Chicago's, grittier. Jasmine collected her suitcase and took a city bus to Latonia's address in a working-class neighborhood on the east side. The apartment building had seen better days. Peeling paint, security door with a broken lock, hallway lights flickering erratically. Latonia opened the door after Jasmine's second knock. "Hey," she said, her eyes immediately dropping to Jasmine's midsection. "You didn't mention you were pregnant." "I'm sorry," Jasmine replied, suddenly conscious of how visible her 5-month belly had become. "I should have told you." Latonia sighed, stepping aside. "Come in. It's getting late." The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with barely enough space for Latonia's furniture. The couch that would be Jasmine's bed was worn but clean, with a folded sheet and thin blanket already placed at one end. "Bathroom's through there," Latonia pointed. "I work early shifts, so I'm out by 6. Try not to make noise in the mornings." "Thank you for letting me stay," Jasmine said, sitting carefully on the couch. "It won't be for long, I promise." Latonia's expression softened slightly. "Is the father in the picture?" Jasmine shook her head. "That's rough." Latonia hesitated. "Look, I don't have much, but I can help you apply for assistance tomorrow. You'll need it." "Actually, it's triplets," Jasmine said quietly. Latonia's eyes widened. "Triplets? Jesus, Jasmine." She ran a hand over her face. "My boyfriend's moving in next month. This arrangement can't be long-term." "I understand." That night, lying on the too-short couch, Jasmine stared at the ceiling. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement. 3 lives. Her responsibility alone. The following week passed in a blur of applications, jobs, public assistance, subsidized housing. Each form required proof of residence, which Latonia reluctantly provided. Each interview ended the same way once her pregnancy became apparent. "We'll keep your application on file," they would say, eyes sliding away from her growing belly. At the public housing office, the news was equally discouraging. "The waiting list is 18 months minimum," the overworked case manager explained. "But these babies will be born in 3 months, Jasmine protested. "I'm sorry. There are family shelters, but they have waiting lists too." By the end of her second week in Cleveland, Jasmine had spent a third of Thomas's money on prenatal vitamins and doctor visits. The obstetrician at the county hospital had confirmed what Thomas already knew: identical triplets, all boys, developing normally despite the circumstances. "You'll need to take it easy in the 3rd trimester, the doctor advised. "Multiple births can come early. Take it easy." The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine as she continued her desperate search for work and housing. On her 18th day in Cleveland, Latonia delivered the news Jasmine had been dreading. "My boyfriend's lease ends sooner than expected. He's moving in next week." Jasmine nodded, already packing her suitcase. "I understand. Thank you for the time you've given me." That night, Jasmine checked into a women's shelter downtown. The intake counselor eyed her pregnant belly with concern. "We usually have a 30-day maximum stay," she explained, "but we can work with your situation. Have you applied for assistance?" "Yes," Jasmine replied, clutching her suitcase, her entire world reduced to a single bag and the lives inside her. "I'm on every waiting list in the city." The shelter room held 6 beds, Jasmine was assigned one near the bathroom, a small mercy for a pregnant woman. As she placed her suitcase under the metal frame bed, she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. Dark circles underlined her eyes, her face thinner despite her growing belly. 5 months ago, I was serving coffee to judges, she whispered to her reflection. Now I'm homeless. In the dim light of the shelter, Jasmine made a silent promise to her unborn sons. We'll get through this. I'll find a way. And one day, he'll look into my eyes as an equal. On that day, I'll show him he wasn't just wrong about me. He was wrong about everything. While riding the bus to her first job interview the next morning, Jasmine couldn't imagine that 15 years later she would be returning to Chicago in her private jet with 3 extraordinary sons and a fortune that would make Thomas Hartwell look like a corner attorney. The Cleveland Greyhound station was a far cry from Chicago's gleaming terminals. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow on the worn linoleum floor as Jasmine collected her single suitcase from the luggage compartment. Her back ached from the long ride and her swollen feet protested each step. Outside, the October air carried a biting chill that her thin jacket did little to shield against. LaTonya waited by the curb in a rusted Honda Civic, engine running. She didn't get out to help with the suitcase. "Hey," she said as Jasmine slid into the passenger seat. Her eyes immediately dropped to Jasmine's protruding belly. "You didn't mention you were that pregnant." Jasmine rested a protective hand on her stomach. "I'm 5 months." LaTonya pulled into traffic, her expression unreadable. "Is it just the one?" "Actually," Jasmine hesitated, already sensing the shift in her cousin's demeanor. "It's triplets." The car swerved slightly. "Triplets? Jesus, Jasmine." LaTonya's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "My place is barely big enough for me. I won't take up much space," Jasmine promised. "Just the couch until I find work." The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with a perpetually out-of-order elevator. By the time they reached LaTonya's door, Jasmine was breathing heavily, her hand braced against the peeling wallpaper. "You okay?" LaTonya asked, fishing for her keys. "Fine. Just need to catch my breath." The apartment was small but clean, a 1-bedroom with mismatched furniture and faded curtains. The couch that would be Jasmine's bed sagged in the middle, a folded sheet and thin blanket already placed at one end. "Bathroom's through there," LaTonya pointed. "I work early shifts at the hospital cafeteria, so I'm out by 5. Try not to make noise." "Thank you for letting me stay," Jasmine said, sitting carefully on the couch. LaTonya's expression softened slightly. "The father not in the picture?" Jasmine shook her head, the memory of Thomas's cold dismissal still raw. "Well," LaTonya sighed, "we'll figure something out. But my boyfriend's lease is up next month. He's moving in, so this can't be permanent." That night, lying on the lumpy couch that smelled faintly of cigarettes, Jasmine stared at the water stains on the ceiling. Outside, sirens wailed, and somewhere in the building, a couple argued in raised voices. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement beneath. 3 lives dependent solely on her. "We'll be okay," she whispered to her unborn sons. Somehow. 2 weeks passed in a blur of rejection. Each morning, Jasmine would leave the apartment with LaTonya, searching for any work she could find. Each afternoon, she'd return with the same news. "We'll keep your application on file," they would say, eyes sliding away from her growing belly. On her 15th day in Cleveland, LaTonya delivered the news Jasmine had been dreading. "Greg's roommate is moving out early. He's coming here next week." Jasmine nodded, already mentally packing her suitcase. "I understand." "I'm sorry," LaTonya offered, genuine regret in her voice. "I can give you some money for a motel." "No," Jasmine interrupted. "You've done enough. I'll figure something out." The social services office was located in a gray government building downtown. Jasmine took a number and waited 3 hours before being called to a cubicle where a tired-looking caseworker named Ms. Patterson reviewed her situation. "Pregnant with triplets, no permanent address, no income," Ms. Patterson summarized, typing notes into an ancient computer. Father not involved? No. Family support? Jasmine thought of Latonia's cramped apartment. Limited. Ms. Patterson sighed, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. I'll be honest with you. The waiting list for subsidized housing is 18 months minimum. 18 months? Jasmine's voice rose in panic. But these babies will be born in 3 months. I know, and I'm sorry. There are family shelters, but they have waiting lists too. She handed Jasmine a stack of forms. Fill these out for emergency assistance and SNAP benefits. Meanwhile, I suggest you try Women's Haven downtown. They sometimes have beds available. That evening, Jasmine stood outside Women's Haven, a converted church with barred windows and a heavy metal door. She pulled her suitcase closer, summoning courage before pressing the buzzer. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair introduced herself as Dorothy, the night supervisor. She led Jasmine through a security check and intake process, eyeing her pregnant belly with concern. How far along are you, honey? Almost 6 months. Triplets. Dorothy's eyebrows rose. Lord have mercy. You're carrying 3 babies and living on the streets? As of today, Jasmine confirmed, fighting back tears. The shelter room held 12 beds. Jasmine was assigned one near the bathroom, a small mercy given her frequent need to urinate. As she placed her suitcase under the metal frame bed, she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. Dark circles underlined her eyes, her face thinner despite her growing belly. We usually have a 30-day maximum stay, Dorothy explained. But we can bend rules for special circumstances. Have you had proper prenatal care? Jasmine nodded. I've been to the county hospital. They confirmed identical triplets, all boys. Dorothy sat beside her on the thin mattress. And the father? The question opened a wound still raw and bleeding. Jasmine looked away, but not before Dorothy caught the flash of pain in her eyes. I see, Dorothy said softly. Well, you're not the first and won't be the last. But 3 babies? That's going to take a village. The next morning, Dorothy introduced Jasmine to a hospital administrator who sometimes visited the shelter. By afternoon, Jasmine had secured a position as an early morning cleaner at Cleveland Memorial. It's $5 an hour off the books, Dorothy explained. Not ideal, but it's something until your benefits come through. At 4:30 the next morning, Jasmine donned the gray uniform provided by the hospital's maintenance department. Her growing belly made buttoning the shirt difficult, but she managed to conceal her pregnancy under a loose sweater. The work was grueling, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, scrubbing toilets. By 7:30, when her shift ended, Jasmine's back screamed in protest and her swollen feet barely fit into her shoes. But the cash payment of $20 felt like victory. That same day, she secured a second job at a diner 12 blocks from the hospital. From 11 to 3, she waited tables, hiding her pregnancy beneath an oversized apron. Between jobs, she rested on park benches, conserving energy for the long hours ahead. At night, in the thin mattressed bed at the shelter, Jasmine studied for her GED by the dim light of a desk lamp. Other women watched with a mixture of admiration and pity. Why bother? Asked Tamika, a young woman in the next bed. You'll have your hands full with 3 babies. Because they deserve better than this, Jasmine replied, not looking up from her textbook, and I'm going to give it to them. As her 7th month of pregnancy approached, Jasmine's body began to rebel against the punishing schedule. Her ankles swelled to twice their normal size and backaches became constant companions. The hospital supervisor noticed her struggle one morning as she winced while lifting a trash bag. How far along are you? He asked, his tone not unkind. Almost 7 months, Jasmine admitted. He frowned. You should have said something. There are liability issues. By that afternoon, she'd lost the hospital job. The diner followed suit a week later when Jasmine fainted while carrying a tray of dishes. The manager helped her to a chair, placed $50 in her hand and gently suggested she not return. "You need rest," he said, his eyes reflecting genuine concern. "Those babies are telling you to slow down." Back at the shelter, Dorothy helped Jasmine apply for emergency Medicaid and expedited SNAP benefits. The $5,000 from Thomas, which Jasmine had hidden in a pouch sewn into her bra, was dwindling rapidly. Each prenatal vitamin, each bus fare, each necessary item of maternity clothing decreased the precious reserve. At her 8th-month checkup at the county hospital, the obstetrician frowned at her blood pressure readings. "You're showing early signs of preeclampsia," he warned. "Multiple pregnancies are high risk already. You need bed rest for the remainder of your term." Jasmine almost laughed. "Doctor, I'm living in a shelter. There's no such thing as bed rest." His frown deepened. "Then at minimum you need to stay off your feet as much as possible. No work, no exertion. These babies could come early, and we want them to be as developed as possible." The ultrasound technician called her in next. As the cold gel spread across her enormous belly, Jasmine watched the screen with wonder. 3 distinct profiles appeared, 3 perfect faces, 3 beating hearts. "All boys, identical," the technician confirmed. "Growing well despite everything." She hesitated before asking, "Will the father want to know about their progress?" Jasmine stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears. There is no father. That evening, back at the shelter, Jasmine found a discarded newspaper in the common room. The business section featured a familiar face, Thomas Hartwell standing beside a federal judge, both smiling broadly. The headline read, "Hartwell confirmed as youngest federal judge in Boston Circuit." Dorothy found her there, staring at the photo, tears streaming silently down her face. "Bad news?" the older woman asked gently. Jasmine handed her the paper. "That's them," she said quietly. "That's their father." Dorothy studied the image of the handsome, well-dressed man. "A judge?" she asked, incredulous. "He said I wasn't good enough for his world," Jasmine whispered. "That a black girl from Chicago's South Side with no high school diploma would be an unbearable burden to his career." Dorothy's face hardened. "Men like that deserve special places in hell." "I don't want his hell," Jasmine replied, wiping her tears. "I want to build something so magnificent that one day he'll realize what he threw away." The final weeks of pregnancy confined Jasmine to the shelter. Her Medicaid had been approved, ensuring proper medical care, but the SNAP benefits barely covered adequate nutrition. Dorothy often shared her own meals, insisting Jasmine needed extra protein for the babies. "You're eating for 4 now," she'd say, sliding half her sandwich onto Jasmine's plate. At night, Jasmine continued studying for her GED by lamplight, one hand resting protectively on her enormous belly. The 3 lives inside her had become her purpose, her reason to push forward despite every obstacle. In her 34th week of pregnancy, Jasmine woke to a sharp pain and wet sheets. Dorothy, doing her night rounds, heard her gasp. "What is it, honey?" "I think my water broke," Jasmine managed between clenched teeth. Dorothy sprang into action, helping Jasmine into a robe while calling for a taxi. "Too early for an ambulance to waste time," she explained, gathering Jasmine's hospital bag. "Better we get moving now." The contractions intensified during the taxi ride. Dorothy held Jasmine's hand, coaching her through each wave of pain. "Breathe, honey. You're stronger than you think." Cleveland Memorial's emergency entrance was brightly lit against the 3 a.m. darkness. Nurses rushed Jasmine to the maternity ward while Dorothy handled paperwork, claiming to be her aunt. 22 hours later, after a labor that tested the limits of human endurance, Jasmine held Jordan, Jamal, and Justin for the first time. 3 perfect, identical boys, each weighing a miraculous 4 pounds, 8 ounces, remarkably healthy for triplets born 6 weeks early. "You have fighters here, Ms. Williams," the doctor said, genuine admiration in his voice. "They're small but mighty." Dorothy stood beside the bed, tears flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. "Look what you did," she whispered. "Look at these beautiful boys." A well-meaning nurse adjusted Jasmine's IV, her eyes reflecting the question everyone had been too polite to ask directly. "How will you care for 3 babies on your own?" Jasmine met her gaze steadily, her exhaustion momentarily eclipsed by determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," she answered. "They deserve everything." As she cradled her sons in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell of the maternity ward, Jasmine couldn't possibly know that one day those same babies would have their own rooms in a Pacific Heights mansion, and that the name Williams would become synonymous with innovation and success. "You have fighters here," the doctor's words echoed in Jasmine's mind as she carefully loaded 3 infant carriers into a taxi 7 days later. The hospital had kept the triplets for observation due to their premature birth, but now she faced the daunting task of bringing them home, except home was a shelter with a 30-day maximum stay. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyeing the 3 identical babies with obvious concern. "Women's Haven on Euclid Avenue," Jasmine replied, her voice betraying her exhaustion. The driver turned around completely. "The shelter? With 3 newborns?" "Please," Jasmine whispered. "It's all we have right now." Dorothy waited at the shelter entrance, her face lighting up at the sight of the babies. She helped carry 2 of the carriers inside while Jasmine managed the 3rd and her suitcase. "We've got a surprise for you," Dorothy announced, leading them not to the communal bedroom but to a small storage room that had been hastily converted into a private space. A twin bed had been pushed against one wall, and 3 second-hand bassinets lined the opposite side. "The ladies took up a collection," Dorothy explained. "It's not much, but it's private. The director's bending rules to let you stay here until something better comes along." Tears filled Jasmine's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, placing Justin's carrier on the floor. "I don't know what I would have done." That night, as the triplets slept in their bassinets, each adorned with a handwritten name tag created by shelter residents, Jasmine collapsed onto her narrow bed. Her body ached from the cesarean delivery, and her mind raced with the overwhelming responsibility now resting solely on her shoulders. The first 2 months passed in a fog of sleeplessness and constant feeding. With 3 infants on slightly different schedules, Jasmine rarely slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. Dorothy proved invaluable, often taking a crying baby down to the common room so Jasmine could nurse the other 2. "You need to think about what's next," Dorothy said one afternoon, cradling Jamal while Jasmine fed Jordan and Justin. "The director's been generous, but she's getting pressure from the board about your extended stay." Jasmine nodded, her eyes heavy with fatigue. "I've been calling about subsidized apartments. Nothing yet." "What about work? These boys need diapers, formula when your milk isn't enough for all 3. Who would hire me with triplets? And who would watch them while I work?" Dorothy hesitated. "I might have a solution, for the childcare part at least." The next day, Dorothy introduced Jasmine to her sister Marlene, a retired nurse who lived in a small apartment in the same building as a recently vacated unit. "It's not much," Marlene warned as she showed them the 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a temperamental radiator. "And the neighborhood's rough, but it's only $400 a month, utilities included." Jasmine surveyed the space, mentally calculating. The bedroom would fit a full-size bed for her and eventually cribs for the boys. The living room was large enough for a second-hand couch and small dining table. "I'll take it," she decided. "Now I just need work." Dorothy's solution came through again. "Marlene can watch the boys during day shifts. I can help during evenings. Between us, we can cover while you work." By the time the triplets were 3 months old, Jasmine had secured 3 jobs: morning shifts at a telemarketing center, afternoon hours at a laundromat, and weekend work at a 24-hour diner. Between the 3 positions, she cobbled together enough income to cover rent, diapers, and formula, with nothing left over. The apartment gradually accumulated donated items: a shabby couch from a church charity, a rickety kitchen table from Marlene's cousin, 3 second-hand cribs from a shelter volunteer. The walls remained bare except for a calendar where Jasmine meticulously tracked feeding schedules, work hours, and GED study time. Every night after putting the boys to sleep, Jasmine would study by the light of a single lamp, determined to complete her high school equivalency. The remaining money from Thomas, now less than $1,000, was her emergency fund, tucked inside an envelope taped beneath the bathroom sink. "You should be sleeping when they sleep," Dorothy admonished one evening, finding Jasmine hunched over an algebra textbook. "I need this diploma," Jasmine replied without looking up. "No diploma, no better job, no better job, no future for them." When the triplets turned 8 months old, they began crawling, all three at once, as if synchronized. Jasmine used a disposable camera to capture them inching across the worn carpet, their identical faces alight with determination. "They're like little soldiers," Marlene laughed, watching the boys' coordinated movements, all heading in the same direction. "They're on a mission," Jasmine agreed, snapping another photo as Jordan reached a toy car first, followed seconds later by his brothers. The following month brought Jasmine's first real crisis as a mother. All three boys developed high fevers simultaneously, their normally active bodies listless and burning hot. Without health insurance, her emergency Medicaid had expired. Jasmine faced a desperate decision. "The ER will charge hundreds I don't have," she told Dorothy over the phone, panic edging her voice. "But they're so hot, and Jamal won't stop crying." "Bring them to me," Dorothy instructed. "My nephew's a pediatric resident. He owes me favors." Dorothy's nephew diagnosed an ear infection in all three boys and provided antibiotics without charge. "They'll be fine," he assured Jasmine, "but you need to get them insured. Apply for CHIP. They'll qualify based on your income." That night, after administering medicine to her feverish sons, Jasmine collapsed into a kitchen chair, staring at the empty refrigerator. She'd spent her last $20 on a taxi to Dorothy's. There would be no food tomorrow unless she dipped into Thomas's money, the emergency fund she'd promised herself to save for a true crisis. The refrigerator contained half a can of beans, a small carton of milk, and a slice of bread. Jasmine divided the beans between herself and Dorothy, who had stayed to help with the sick infants. "The boys ate the last of the baby food," she explained, pushing the larger portion toward Dorothy. "I'll get paid Friday." Dorothy frowned but accepted the food. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Jasmine. You need strength to care for them." 2 grueling months later, Jasmine sat in a folding chair at the Cleveland Adult Learning Center, wearing the one decent outfit she owned, a navy skirt and white blouse purchased from a thrift store. The triplets, now 1 year old, dozed in a triple stroller she'd assembled from discarded parts and duct tape. "Jasmine Williams," the director called. She approached the small stage, conscious of curious glances toward her sleeping babies. The certificate felt impossibly light in her hands, a simple piece of paper representing countless hours of study, determination, and sacrifice. "Congratulations on completing your GED," the director said, shaking her hand, "especially under such challenging circumstances." Afterward, as Jasmine wheeled the triplets toward the bus stop, an older Asian woman in a crisp pantsuit approached. "Ms. Williams, I'm Linda Chen, your mathematics instructor." Jasmine smiled wearily. "You probably don't remember me. I could only attend 2 classes, did most of the work from home." "That's why I remember you," Ms. Chen replied. "Your test scores were exceptional despite your absence. Have you considered further education?" Jasmine gestured toward the triplets now stirring from their nap. "I have other priorities at the moment." Ms. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "The city offers a free basic programming course through the Workforce Development Office. Meets evenings twice weekly. Childcare provided. You have a logical mind. You'd excel." "Programming? Like computers?" "Exactly. Entry-level programming jobs start at $40,000 annually. With your aptitude, you could support your family comfortably within a year or 2. That night, after settling the boys in their cribs, Jasmine researched computer programming on a public library computer. The starting salaries made her dizzy, 3 times what she currently earned across 3 exhausting jobs. 2 weeks later, Jasmine enrolled in the programming course. 3 evenings a week, she would bring the triplets to the community center where volunteers watched children while parents learned valuable skills. The boys thrived in the stimulating environment, playing with other children while Jasmine absorbed coding fundamentals. To her surprise, programming came naturally. The logical structures, the problem-solving aspects, they matched how her mind already worked. While other students struggled with basic concepts, Jasmine quickly advanced to creating simple applications. "You have a gift for this," her instructor remarked after Jasmine debugged a program that had stumped him. "Keep at it, and doors will open." The triplets celebrated their 2nd birthday with a small cake Jasmine had baked in their apartment's temperamental oven. Dorothy and Marlene sang "Happy Birthday," while the boys, now walking and speaking in simple sentences, each blew out a single candle. "Make a wish," Jasmine encouraged, her heart swelling as she watched her sons' faces glow in the candlelight. Later that week, at a pediatric clinic where the boys received their 2-year checkups, Jasmine leafed through magazines in the waiting room. A legal journal caught her eye, not her usual reading material, but the cover photo made her breath catch. Thomas Hartwell stared back at her, his handsome face serious beneath the headline, "The Judicial Prodigy, America's Youngest Federal Judge Speaks on Tradition and Excellence." With trembling fingers, Jasmine opened the magazine. The article praised Thomas's swift rise through legal circles, his Harvard education, his impeccable judgment and family pedigree. A photo showed him in judicial robes, ascending the courthouse steps in Boston. Jasmine tore out the page with his picture, then looked up to see her sons playing with blocks in the children's corner of the waiting room. Jordan constructed careful towers while Jamal knocked them down, both laughing as Justin organized the blocks by color. Catching her reflection in the waiting room mirror, Jasmine barely recognized herself. The youthful softness had left her face, replaced by angular determination. Her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before Thomas's rejection, but also a resolve that surpassed mere survival. "One day," she whispered to her reflection, "you'll look into my eyes as an equal, and on that day, I'll show you that you weren't just wrong about me. You were wrong about everything." While pocketing her modest paycheck, Jasmine didn't imagine that in a decade she would be signing multi-million-dollar contracts and that her revolutionary software would be used in the very courtroom where Thomas Hartwell sat as judge. 4 years had passed since that life-altering night in Cleveland when Jasmine had held her newborn triplets for the first time. The peeling paint in her subsidized apartment had been covered with a fresh coat of pale yellow, a weekend project she'd undertaken while the boys napped. Though still modest, the space now resembled a real home, filled with second-hand furniture carefully selected for durability rather than style. "Ms. Williams, Carla wanted you to see this before the meeting," said Raj, a fellow developer, placing a folder on Jasmine's desk. "The client's feedback on the inventory system." Jasmine nodded her thanks, adding the folder to her organized workspace. Her promotion to junior developer at FineTech Solutions had come 3 months earlier, a significant step up from the data entry position she'd started in 18 months before. The company specialized in business software for small and medium enterprises, and her logical mind had quickly impressed supervisors. "Will you make it to Tyler's birthday happy hour?" Raj asked, lingering by her cubicle. "Can't," Jasmine replied, glancing at her watch. "Need to pick up the boys by 5:30. Their after-school program charges by the minute if you're late." Jasmine's carefully calibrated schedule left no room for spontaneity. Each day was a precision operation. Wake at 5, prepare breakfast and lunches, drop the boys at preschool by 7:30, work until 5, pick them up by 5:30, dinner, baths, bedtime stories, then collapse into exhaustion, only to start again the next day. Weekends brought a different routine. While the triplets napped on Saturday afternoons, Jasmine would take her textbooks to the Cleveland Public Library, using the precious hours to study advanced programming languages not covered in her community college courses. It was during one such Saturday that she first noticed him, a tall black man with wire-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed beard, surrounded by stacks of books at a corner table. Week after week, he occupied the same spot, completely absorbed in his reading. Jasmine occasionally caught him glancing her way, but they never spoke, until the day Jordan, Jamal, and Justin, now 4 years old, accompanied her to the library. Normally, they stayed with Dorothy while Jasmine studied, but Dorothy had a doctor's appointment, and Marlene was visiting her sister in Cincinnati. "Remember our library voices," Jasmine reminded them as they entered the children's section. "Choose 2 books each, and we'll sit quietly while Mommy studies." To her amazement, the triplets, now distinguishable by subtle differences in personality rather than appearance, selected books far above their age level. Jordan chose a children's encyclopedia of space, Jamal picked a book about musical instruments, and Justin selected a picture book about the Supreme Court. They settled at a table near Jasmine's usual spot, the boys utterly engrossed in their books despite their young age. She noticed the bearded man watching them with undisguised interest. "Excuse me," he said, approaching their table. "I couldn't help noticing what your sons are reading. They must be very advanced for their age." His voice was rich and melodious, with the careful enunciation of someone who chose words deliberately. "They are," Jasmine acknowledged cautiously. "They've been reading since they were 3. "Remarkable," he said, smiling at the boys. "I'm Michael Carter. I teach African American literature at Cleveland State, visiting from Stanford for the semester." "Jasmine Williams," she replied, "and these are Jordan, Jamal, and Justin." "Triplets?" Michael asked, though the answer was obvious in their identical faces. "Identical," Jasmine confirmed. "They turned 4 last month." Michael knelt to the boy's level. "What are you reading there, young man?" "It's about space," Jordan answered, turning the book to show a diagram of the solar system. "Did you know that light from the sun takes 8 minutes to reach Earth?" Michael's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "I did not know that. That's university-level knowledge." The interaction continued, Michael asking thoughtful questions that the boys eagerly answered. Jasmine watched, both protective and proud, as her sons demonstrated their precocious intelligence. "I should let you get back to your studies," Michael said finally, addressing Jasmine. "But perhaps you'd allow me to buy you a coffee sometime? The cafe here makes a decent latte." Jasmine hesitated, unaccustomed to male attention that wasn't colored by assumptions about a single mother with 3 children. "Just coffee," Michael added, sensing her reluctance. "Professional curiosity about how you've raised such exceptional young men." The following Saturday, while Dorothy watched the boys, Jasmine met Michael at the library cafe. What she'd expected to be a brief, awkward encounter evolved into a 3-hour conversation that ranged from literature to technology to educational philosophy. "How did you end up in programming?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. Jasmine shared a condensed version of her journey, the GED, the free programming course, her determination to provide stability for her sons. "That's extraordinary," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "Most people would have crumbled under that pressure." "Not an option when 3 people depend on you," Jasmine replied simply. Over the following weeks, their Saturday conversations became a ritual. Michael never pressed for personal details, never asked about the triplets' father, never made her feel judged for her circumstances. Instead, he recommended books, discussed ideas, and genuinely listened when she spoke. One Saturday, he brought children's books for the boys, thoughtfully selected to match their individual interests. The simple kindness brought tears to Jasmine's eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said, examining a beautifully illustrated book about musical instruments for Jamal. "I wanted to," Michael replied. "They're remarkable children. You've done an amazing job with them." At work, Jasmine's competence had earned her assignment to a new project, developing software for a small law firm that needed a document management system. As she worked with the attorneys to understand their requirements, she identified a significant gap in the legal technology market. "The problem," explained Sandra Berkowitz, the firm's managing partner, "is that we can see patterns in sentencing, but we can't quantify them. Judge Thompson consistently gives harsher sentences to black defendants, but proving it requires analyzing hundreds of cases manually." Jasmine thought about this long after the meeting ended. That night, after putting the boys to bed, she opened her laptop and began sketching ideas for an algorithm that could analyze sentencing data and identify patterns based on race, gender, and socioeconomic factors. The concept consumed her. Every night after the triplets fell asleep, she would work until the early morning hours, developing a prototype that could parse court documents and extract sentencing information. Her old laptop frequently overheated from the processing demands, forcing her to program in short bursts. 2 months into the law firm project, Jasmine requested a meeting with her supervisor, Daniel, to propose expanding the document management system to include her pattern recognition algorithm. "Imagine a software that could detect when judges sentence consistently more harshly based on race or socioeconomic status," she explained, showing a rough demonstration on her laptop. Daniel watched the presentation with a frown. "It's ambitious, Jasmine. Maybe too ambitious. Who in the judicial system would actually buy software that exposes their own biases? Public defenders' offices, civil rights organizations, even the courts themselves if they're genuinely interested in fairness," Jasmine argued. Daniel shook his head. "The company isn't going to invest resources in something this speculative. Stick to the document management system. That's what the client is paying for." Discouraged but not defeated, Jasmine continued developing her algorithm in her limited free time. The triplets, now in their second semester of preschool, were thriving academically but required constant stimulation. One evening, Michael visited their apartment for the first time, bringing dinner from a local Caribbean restaurant. Jasmine had been hesitant to invite him to their modest home, but the boys had been asking when Mr. Michael would read to them again. "This is a lovely space," Michael said, taking in the small but orderly apartment. Children's artwork decorated the walls and bookshelves lined every available surface. "It's small, but it works for us," Jasmine replied, setting the dining table with mismatched plates. After dinner, Michael read to the boys, doing different voices for each character in the story. Jasmine watched from the kitchen doorway, a strange ache in her chest at the sight of her son so comfortable with this kind, intelligent man. When the boys were finally asleep, Jasmine showed Michael her laptop. "I've been working on something," she explained, demonstrating the rudimentary algorithm. "The company I work for isn't interested, but I know it could work." Michael listened intently as she outlined her vision for software that could identify and quantify judicial bias. When she finished, he sat back, impressed. "This could be revolutionary," he said. "Why would your company pass on it?" "They think no one in the legal system would buy something that exposes their own flaws," Jasmine explained. Michael shook his head. "That's short-sighted. The legal community is increasingly concerned about bias. There are conferences and initiatives dedicated to addressing it. This tool could be invaluable." "That's what I thought," Jasmine agreed, closing her laptop. "But developing it properly would require resources I don't have." "Great innovations come from people who don't accept limitations imposed by others," Michael said. "Keep developing it. The right opportunity will come." In the weeks that followed, Jasmine continued refining her algorithm during late-night programming sessions. The ancient laptop struggled with the processing demands, often crashing just as she made breakthroughs. Still, the core functionality was taking shape, a system that could analyze thousands of court decisions and identify statistically significant patterns in sentencing disparities. Spring arrived in Cleveland, bringing with it Michael's last month as a visiting professor. On a warm Sunday, he invited Jasmine and the boys to a picnic in the cultural gardens. The children raced ahead on the paths while Jasmine and Michael walked behind, talking easily about books, ideas, and the future. "I'll be returning to Stanford next month. Michael said, watching the triplets examine a fountain with scientific curiosity. "We'll miss you," Jasmine replied, surprised by how much she meant it. Over the past months, Michael had become a fixture in their lives, bringing books for the boys, discussing Jasmine's algorithm, offering perspective and encouragement without expectation. "I was thinking," Michael began, then paused as if carefully choosing his words. "Stanford has an excellent computer science department. There might be resources there for your project." Jasmine looked at him quizzically. "Are you suggesting I move to California?" "I'm suggesting you consider options beyond Cleveland," Michael clarified. "Your talents are extraordinary, Jasmine. Your vision for this software could transform the legal system. Don't let limited resources here constrain what you could accomplish." They walked in silence for a moment, watching the boys chase a butterfly across the grass. "I can't uproot them," Jasmine finally said. "Their stability is everything." "Children are remarkably adaptable, especially when they have a mother as devoted as you," Michael replied. "Just consider it. No pressure, no expectations." Later, as the boys explored a playground under Michael's watchful eye, he turned to Jasmine with uncharacteristic nervousness. "There's something else I've been wanting to ask," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Would it be presumptuous to officially call you my girlfriend now?" Jasmine looked at this kind, brilliant man who had entered their lives so unexpectedly, who read to her sons in different voices, who respected her intelligence, who saw her struggles and offered support without pity. "Not presumptuous at all," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. As she embraced Michael under the spring sky, Jasmine didn't know that her rudimentary algorithm would be the foundation of Wilcar Technologies, a company that in less than a decade would be valued in billions and would change the American judicial system forever. Michael's question hung in the spring air between them, full of possibility. "Would it be presumptuous to officially call you my girlfriend now?" "Not presumptuous at all," Jasmine replied, a smile spreading across her face as she embraced him under the cloudless sky. 3 years later, that embrace had transformed into something much more permanent. The modest Cleveland park where Michael had first called her his girlfriend was replaced by a small garden behind a church where they exchanged vows. The ceremony was intimate, Dorothy serving as matron of honor, the triplets as ring-bearers, their identical 7-year-old faces beaming with excitement. "By the power vested in me," the minister said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As Michael kissed her, Jasmine felt a sense of security she'd never known before. The boy who had spent 3 hours reading to her sons on their first date was now their father in every way that mattered. 2 weeks after the wedding, they gathered in a courthouse downtown. Michael held Jasmine's hand as the judge reviewed the adoption papers. "And the biological father has relinquished rights?" the judge asked, peering over her glasses. "He was never involved, Your Honor," Jasmine answered steadily. "There's been no contact since before they were born." The judge nodded, stamping the documents with a decisive thud. "Then, by the authority of the state of Ohio, I hereby declare Jordan, Jamal, and Justin Williams to be the legal children of Michael Carter, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." Michael knelt before the boys, tears glistening behind his glasses. "I've always known you were my sons," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Now it's official." The move to Cincinnati came 6 months later when Michael accepted a tenure-track position at the university there. Jasmine secured a remote position with a larger technology firm, allowing them to purchase a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools. "I call this one!" Jordan shouted, racing into the largest of the children's bedrooms, his brothers close behind. "You'll share like always," Jasmine laughed, setting down a box labeled kitchen. Their new life took shape quickly. Michael threw himself into teaching literature while working on a book about African American poetry. Jasmine's remote position paid significantly better than her Cleveland job, allowing them to slowly build savings while providing the boys with music lessons, science camps, and the educational enrichment they craved. But late at night, after the household settled into silence, Jasmine would open her laptop and return to the project that still consumed her, the judicial analysis software that no company had been willing to develop. "You should sleep," Michael said one night, finding her hunched over lines of code at 2 in the morning. "Almost done with this function," she replied, rubbing her eyes. "The pattern recognition is finally working properly." Michael leaned over her shoulder, studying the screen. "This is remarkable, Jazz. You've built this entirely in your spare time?" She nodded, stretching her stiff neck. "Every night for 3 years. It can now analyze sentencing patterns across jurisdictions, identifying statistical outliers in how specific judges sentence based on race, gender, or economic status." "Have you thought about approaching legal tech companies again?" Michael asked. "This is far more sophisticated than your original concept." "They still won't see the market potential," Jasmine sighed. "Legal tech is conservative. They build what law firms explicitly ask for, not what could transform the system." A month later, Jasmine was refining code in her home office when 7-year-old Jordan wandered in, his eyes drawn to the colorful graphs on her screen. "What's that, Mom?" he asked, pointing to a complex data visualization. "It shows patterns in how judges sentence different people," Jasmine explained, not expecting him to understand. Jordan studied the screen with surprising intensity. "But why is this line going up so much faster than this one?" "That shows black defendants get longer sentences than white defendants for the same crime," she explained, impressed by his perception. He frowned, his small face serious. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. That's why I'm building this program, to show the unfairness with numbers that can't be argued with." Jordan pointed to a section of code visible in another window. "What if you used a tree structure here instead of linear? It would be faster." Jasmine stared at her son in astonishment. "How do you know about tree structures?" He shrugged. "I read it in your algorithm book, the one on your nightstand." From that moment, Jordan became her unofficial programming assistant, absorbing concepts with extraordinary speed. His brothers, not to be outdone, soon joined the nightly sessions, Jamal displaying an intuitive grasp of statistical patterns, Justin asking insightful questions about the legal implications. The opportunity Jasmine had been waiting for arrived unexpectedly through Michael's academic connections. A former student of his now worked at a small civil rights law firm in Cincinnati that specialized in challenging discriminatory practices in the criminal justice system. "They're looking for better ways to identify patterns of bias," Michael explained over dinner. "I mentioned your software. They want to meet." The law firm's offices were modest, a converted Victorian house with creaking floors and law books stacked on every surface. Jasmine arrived in her best business attire, carrying her laptop and a portfolio of documentation. "Most bias detection relies on anecdotal evidence," she explained to the 3 attorneys gathered around a conference table. "My software quantifies what you already know intuitively: systemic prejudice." The attorneys exchanged skeptical glances as she opened her laptop. "Show us," said Martin Freeman, the firm's founding partner. Jasmine launched the program, uploading a sample dataset of 500 criminal cases from a single jurisdiction. The attorneys watched in silence as the software parsed the information, graphs and charts materializing on screen. "This is Judge William Peterson's sentencing history over 5 years, Jasmine explained, pointing to a stark visualization. "For identical crimes with identical criminal histories, he sentences black defendants to terms averaging 42% longer than white defendants." Freeman leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Can you filter by type of crime?" Jasmine nodded, making adjustments. New graphs appeared, each telling the same story. "Drug offenses show the most extreme disparity," she continued. "Possession charges result in probation for 78% of white defendants versus only 23% of black defendants." By the end of the presentation, the skepticism had vanished. Freeman turned to his colleagues. This is exactly what we need for the class action against the 6th District. You've built this entirely on your own? Asked Sarah Livingston, the youngest attorney. Yes, Jasmine confirmed. Over 4 years, working nights after my day job. We want to license it, Freeman said decisively. How much? The question caught Jasmine off guard. She'd been so focused on developing the software that she hadn't considered pricing. $2,000 per month, she said, naming a figure that seemed reasonable. Done, Freeman agreed without hesitation, and we'll introduce it to our network of civil rights attorneys if it performs as demonstrated. That evening, Jasmine and Michael celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of champagne after the boys were asleep. $2,000 monthly from one firm, Michael marveled, raising his glass, and potentially more if their colleagues adopt it. It's a start, Jasmine said, her mind already racing ahead. If I can get 10 firms using it, that's $20,000 monthly, more than my current salary. You could leave your job, Michael suggested. Focus on developing this full-time. 3 months later, Freeman's firm presented their first case using Jasmine's software as evidence. The resulting media coverage brought inquiries from 3 additional civil rights organizations, all wanting to license the program. Sitting at their kitchen table, Jasmine showed Michael the numbers. With 4 clients at $2,000 each, plus potential consulting fees for customization, we're approaching $10,000 monthly. That's almost my current salary. So you're going to do it? Michael asked. Start your own company? Jasmine nodded, a mixture of excitement and terror bubbling inside her. I gave notice today. My last day is in 2 weeks. The transformation of their garage into a home office happened over a weekend. Michael and the boys helped install desks, set up computers, and run internet cables. Jordan insisted on helping configure the server that would host the software for remote access by clients. What will you call your company? Michael asked as they assembled a bookshelf. Jasmine had considered many names, but one felt particularly right. Wilcar Technologies. Michael smiled, understanding immediately. Williams Carter. It has a nice ring to it. The official incorporation papers arrived a week later. Jasmine Williams Carter, CEO and founder of Wilcar Technologies, stood in her garage-turned-office, staring at the framed document with a sense of unreality. The triplets, now demonstrating distinct talents despite their identical appearance, became unofficial members of the team. Each evening after homework, they would gather in the office to contribute their unique perspectives. Jordan, with his innate understanding of code structure, suggested elegant solutions to processing problems. Jamal, the mathematician, identified statistical anomalies that improved accuracy. Justin, with his surprising grasp of legal concepts, helped translate technical findings into language attorneys could use effectively. You 3 should be playing video games or watching TV, Jasmine said one evening, finding them absorbed in testing a new feature. This is more interesting, Justin replied without looking up. Besides, we're helping people get treated fairly. The boys' awareness of injustice had emerged early and developed rapidly. Though Jasmine never discussed Thomas with them, they somehow understood that fairness wasn't guaranteed. It had to be fought for and protected. 6 months after founding Wilcar, Jasmine received her first major validation. The Cincinnati Bar Association invited her to demonstrate the software at their annual technology showcase. Standing before a room of attorneys and judges, she presented the system with confidence that would have been unimaginable to the frightened young woman who had once stood in Thomas Hartwell's penthouse. Legal technology typically focuses on efficiency, she explained to the audience. Wilcar focuses on equity. Our system doesn't just organize case files, it reveals the hidden patterns of bias that undermine justice. The presentation generated 5 new clients, bringing Wilcar's monthly revenue to $20,000. For the first time since the triplets' birth, Jasmine had financial breathing room, enough to hire a part-time programmer to handle basic maintenance while she focused on advanced features. One night, working late after everyone else had gone to bed, Jasmine stumbled across a news article featuring a courthouse in Boston. The photograph showed a line of judges in their robes, including a familiar face, Thomas Hartwell, now established in his federal judgeship, looking distinguished and confident. Jasmine saved the image to a folder on her desktop, then opened her software. "One day," she whispered, "your own court will use my system to show that you are part of the problem." While installing the basic server in her garage, Jasmine didn't imagine that in less than 5 years, Clerk Technologies would have offices in 3 cities, a staff of 200 employees, and she would be about to close a multi-million-dollar contract with the California judicial system. While installing the basic server in her garage, Jasmine couldn't possibly have anticipated the seismic shift her life would undergo in the coming years. The humble beginnings of Clerk Technologies, born from late nights coding after her children were asleep, had planted seeds that would grow with astonishing speed. 2 years later, Jasmine stood at the window of her Chicago office watching the city bustle 40 floors below. The same skyline that had once witnessed her departure with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams now framed her triumphant return as a rising tech entrepreneur. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," announced Tricia, her executive assistant, placing a tablet on the glass conference table, "and the Cincinnati team just closed the Whitman & Associates account." Jasmine nodded, straightening the lapel of her tailored blazer. "That brings us to 53 law firms using our software. Any word from the California Bar Association?" "Their ethics committee approved the trial implementation. They want you to present at their annual meeting next month." In just 24 months, Clerk Technologies had expanded from Jasmine's garage to offices in Cincinnati and Chicago, with a satellite location recently opened in Atlanta. The staff had grown from 1 part-time programmer to 50 full-time employees, software engineers, data scientists, legal consultants, and administrative personnel. The original algorithm, designed to identify patterns of bias in criminal sentencing, had evolved into a sophisticated suite of analytical tools that allowed legal professionals to quantify and address systemic inequities. What began as a way to help civil rights attorneys build stronger cases had become essential software for public defenders, law school clinics, and progressive district attorneys' offices. "Mom!" Jordan's voice echoed through the speakerphone. "Guess what? I fixed that processing bottleneck in the database function." At 9 years old, Jordan Williams Carter had become an unofficial member of the development team, his intuitive understanding of code architecture surpassing many adult programmers. His identical brothers were equally exceptional in their domains. Jamal's mathematical abilities had earned him placement in advanced university courses, while Justin's grasp of legal concepts had attorneys twice his age nodding in agreement during technical discussions. "That's wonderful, honey," Jasmine replied, pride warming her voice. "Is Papa helping with dinner?" "He's grading papers," Jordan reported, "but he promised pizza if we finish our homework." Michael had received tenure at the University of Cincinnati, his book on African American literary traditions garnering critical acclaim. Their partnership, intellectual, emotional, parental, had become the foundation upon which Jasmine built everything else. The greatest breakthrough for Clerk came when the California Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers contracted Jasmine to analyze sentencing patterns across the state's judicial system. The resulting report, meticulously documented and statistically irrefutable, revealed disparities so stark they could no longer be dismissed as coincidental. Black defendants received sentences averaging 47% longer than white defendants for identical crimes with comparable criminal histories. Latino defendants faced cash bail requirements nearly twice as high. Women with dependent children were more likely to receive incarceration over alternative sentencing compared to similarly situated men. The report landed on the desk of the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, who convened a special committee to address the findings. Suddenly, Jasmine found herself presenting to rooms full of judges, prosecutors, and policymakers, the very power structures her software was designed to hold accountable. "The beauty of data," she explained during one such presentation, "is its objectivity. These aren't accusations. They're mathematical realities. Our system simply makes visible what has always been present, but easy to overlook or deny. The California Judicial Council's decision to implement Will Carr's analytics system statewide generated headlines and controversy. Traditionalists decried the algorithmic evaluation of judicial discretion, while reform advocates celebrated a breakthrough in accountability. Time magazine's technology issue featured Jasmine on its cover, standing with her arms crossed against a background of code and legal scales, the headline proclaiming, "The Silent Revolutionary: How Jasmine Williams Carter's Algorithm is Exposing America's Justice Gap." The morning the magazine hit newsstands, Jasmine sat with Michael in their kitchen, staring at her own face on the glossy cover. "From a shelter bed to Time magazine in 7 years," Michael marveled, squeezing her hand. "You've rewritten your own story." "Our story," Jasmine corrected, glancing toward the backyard where the triplets were constructing an elaborate fort. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." That afternoon, as Jasmine reviewed expansion plans with her executive team, her phone buzzed with a notification that would alter their trajectory once again. The email came from Horizon Ventures, one of Silicon Valley's premier investment firms. "We've been following Will Carr's growth with interest," the message read. "Our partners would like to discuss a potential Series A investment to accelerate your mission." 3 weeks later, Jasmine found herself in a sleek conference room in San Francisco, presenting Will Carr's vision to 6 partners from Horizon Ventures. The triplets had accompanied her on the trip, exploring the city with Michael while she navigated the high-stakes negotiation. "Your technology has proven its value in California," said Elena Matsuo, Horizon's managing partner. "But we see potential for national implementation. We're prepared to offer $50 million for expansion, with you retaining majority control." The figure momentarily stole Jasmine's breath. $50 million, 10,000 times the amount Thomas had tossed at her that night in Chicago, believing it would solve his problem. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. "With proper capitalization," Jasmine recovered, "we can scale to all 50 states within 3 years. The algorithmic infrastructure is already designed for that growth." The deal was signed on a clear San Francisco afternoon, the city's iconic bay providing a cinematic backdrop to the moment that transformed Will Carr from a promising startup to a major player in legal technology. The funding would allow Jasmine to hire specialized engineers, expand marketing efforts, and establish a headquarters worthy of their ambitions. "We should celebrate," Michael suggested as they walked along the Embarcadero with the boys. "This changes everything." "Not everything," Jasmine replied, watching their sons race ahead. "Just the scale of what's possible." The family's relocation to San Francisco happened with military precision. The boys were enrolled in a progressive private school that could accommodate their advanced abilities. Michael secured a visiting professorship at UC Berkeley while maintaining his tenure at Cincinnati. A Victorian home in Pacific Heights, renovated and spacious, became their new base, a world away from the shelters and cramped apartments of their past. On their first night in the new house, after the triplets were asleep, Jasmine stood on the balcony overlooking the bay, the city lights reflecting on the water below. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said, joining her with 2 glasses of champagne. "I was thinking about the women at Dorothy's shelter," Jasmine replied, accepting the glass. "How many of them had potential that will never be realized because they don't have what I had? People who believed in them. Which is why the foundation is so important," Michael reminded her, referring to the non-profit they'd established with their first significant profits, dedicated to supporting single mothers pursuing education in technology. Will Carr's new headquarters occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, its glass and steel architecture a testament to the company's evolution. Jasmine insisted the space include a fully equipped children's area where employees' kids could spend time after school, a reflection of her values and experiences. The company culture attracted diverse talent, many drawn by Jasmine's story and mission. Her leadership style, rigorous but compassionate, demanding but supportive, created an environment where innovation flourished. Within a year of the Horizon investment, Will Carr's staff had grown to over 100 employees, with offices in 6 cities. The triplets, now approaching their 10th birthday, continued to develop their extraordinary talents. Jordan had created an innovative algorithm that significantly improved the software's processing speed. Jamal, while excelling in mathematics, revealed himself as a gifted cellist, earning an audition with a prestigious youth orchestra. Justin, the most thoughtful of the three, published an essay on juvenile justice reform in his school's magazine that caught the attention of local attorneys. One evening, while preparing for a major presentation to the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Jasmine's attention was captured by a television segment featuring legal commentary on a high-profile case. "Joining us is Federal Judge Thomas Hartwell from the Boston Circuit," announced the anchor, "to discuss sentencing guidelines in federal drug cases." The camera cut to Thomas, his features barely changed from a decade earlier, perhaps more distinguished with subtle touches of gray at his temples, his expression carrying the practiced gravity of judicial authority. "The statistics clearly demonstrate," Thomas said with confident certainty, "that mandatory minimums serve as effective deterrents. Our analysis shows that severe sentencing policies correlate with reduced recidivism rates." Jasmine stared at the screen, a cold anger crystallizing inside her. His analysis directly contradicted the robust data her software had compiled across multiple jurisdictions. His confident assertion wasn't just wrong, it was dangerously misleading, perpetuating the very inequities her life's work aimed to address. Without speaking, she opened her laptop and composed an email to her research team. "Analyze the sentencing history of Judge Thomas Hartwell, Boston Federal Circuit. I want to see his patterns." The next morning, while reviewing the California expansion plans with her executive team, Jasmine received the preliminary report. The patterns in Judge Hartwell's courtroom mirrored those found across the judicial system, but with starker contrasts. Black defendants received sentences 42% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Women with children faced harsher penalties than similarly situated men. First-time offenders from low-income neighborhoods received fewer opportunities for diversion programs compared to those from affluent areas. Jasmine stared at the data, a strange sense of destiny settling over her. The man who had deemed her unworthy, who had cast her aside as an unbearable burden to his ambitions, was perpetuating the very injustices her technology was designed to expose. That evening, she shared the findings with Michael as they watched the boys practice their instruments in the music room of their Pacific Heights home. "It's almost poetic," Michael observed after reviewing the report, "your paths continuing to intersect in this way." "It's not about him," Jasmine insisted, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about the system he represents and protects." 3 weeks later, Jasmine stood before the California Judicial Council, presenting the statewide implementation plan for Will Carr's judicial analytics platform. The audience of judges, attorneys, and administrators listened with rapt attention as she demonstrated how the system could identify patterns of bias at individual, district, and state levels. "This isn't about pointing fingers," she concluded, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had built her credibility brick by brick. "It's about holding a mirror to our system so we can make it truly reflect our highest ideals of equal justice under law." The standing ovation that followed marked another milestone in Will Carr's ascendance. The company that had begun in a converted garage was now reshaping how America's legal system understood and addressed its own failings. As Jasmine watched the evening news in her hotel suite, another report featuring Thomas Hartwell appeared, this time announcing his appointment to the Judicial Ethics Committee of the Federal Bar Association. The irony was almost too perfect. Sitting there in her silk pajamas, a far cry from the frightened young woman who had once stood in Thomas's penthouse, Jasmine didn't know that in less than 3 years she would be invited to speak at the National Conference on Jurisprudence, where Thomas Hartwell would be sitting in the audience, about to discover that the woman he discarded had become one of the most powerful voices in reforming the system he so cherished. Sitting there in her silk pajamas, a far cry from the frightened young woman who had once stood in Thomas's penthouse, Jasmine closed her eyes and considered how far she had come. The television continued playing in the background, Thomas Hartwell's voice a distant echo of a past she had transformed into fuel for her ascent. 3 years passed with the momentum of a rocket launch. Wilcar Technologies now occupied an entire skyscraper in San Francisco's financial district, its 42 floors housing a workforce of over 500. The view from Jasmine's corner office showcased the bay in panoramic splendor, the Golden Gate Bridge visible on clear days, a daily reminder that she had crossed her own impossible spans. The second quarter numbers exceeded projections by 32%, reported Alicia Chen, Wilcar's CFO, sliding another tablet across the glass and steel conference table. The Justice AI implementation in New York's judicial system was unanimously approved by the state board yesterday. Jasmine nodded, her natural hair elegantly styled, perfectly complementing the custom Armani suit she wore. Forbes had recently dubbed her the silent revolutionary, the woman who transformed legal analysis using artificial intelligence to identify patterns of prejudice in criminal sentencing. "And what about the jurisprudence conference preparations?" Jasmine asked, checking her Rolex, a gift from her sons on her last birthday. "Your keynote is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Private jet departs at 5 a.m. The boys will meet you in D.C. They insisted on creating a surprise for your introduction." A smile softened Jasmine's features. Her triplets, now 15, remained her greatest joy and accomplishment. Jordan had developed an algorithm that identified disparities in sentencing based on race and socioeconomic status at 13, work that many doctoral students would envy. Jamal, while maintaining his position as first cellist in the Bay Area Youth Symphony, had published a paper on advanced statistical modeling that was being used to enhance Wilcar's predictive capabilities. Justin, the quietest of the three, had written an article on prison reform that had been cited by the Attorney General in a recent policy speech. "Any news about the participant list?" Jasmine asked, attempting to sound casual despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. Her assistant hesitated, just long enough for Jasmine to know the answer before she spoke. "Yes, Judge Hartwell will be in attendance. He's part of the panel on judicial reform." Jasmine maintained her impassive expression, though her heart raced traitorously. In 15 years, she had tracked Thomas Hartwell's career from a distance. She'd watched him rise through the judicial hierarchy, establish a reputation as a conservative traditionalist, marry a senator's daughter, divorce 5 years later. They had never met in person since that night in Chicago. Thomas had no knowledge of the boys, though his DNA was impressively present in their faces. Jasmine had never sought child support, never attempted contact. Her revenge, if it could be called that, was far more elegant: absolute success. After earning her computer science degree while working at a technology company, Jasmine had developed software that analyzed legal documents to identify inconsistencies. The tool became essential for small law firms that couldn't afford large teams of paralegals. By 30, she had transformed that idea into Wilcar Technologies, now valued at $4.2 billion. Her AI systems were used in courts across 28 states, helping to identify and correct disparities in criminal sentencing. The Wall Street Journal is requesting an interview about your recent $50 million donation to social justice programs, her assistant continued, bringing Jasmine back to the present. "Schedule it for after the conference," Jasmine replied, rising to look out the window. Below, San Francisco pulsed with life and possibility, a world away from the homeless shelter where she had slept with 3 newborn babies. That evening, in her penthouse apartment overlooking Pacific Heights, Jasmine checked her luggage while speaking with her sons via video call. "We're super excited for tomorrow, Mom," said Jordan, with the same smile that illuminated his brothers' faces. "We've written an introduction that will leave everyone speechless," added Jamal. Jasmine felt a twinge of concern. "You're not planning anything embarrassing, are you?" Remember, this is a professional event." "Relax, Mom," responded Justin. "We just want everyone to know how amazing you are, how you raised 3 teenagers while building a tech empire, and how you did it without needing anyone," completed Jordan, "especially an absent father." Jasmine froze, her hand hovering over the suitcase she'd been organizing. "What do you know about that?" The 3 exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that only identical triplets could master. "We found that old news clipping," said Justin finally. "The one with Judge Hartwell on the cover. You kept it in your memory box." "And we noticed the date," added Jamal. 9 months before our birth. "We ran the DNA test with a strand of your hair and compared it with his public profile available in the judicial database," concluded Jordan. 99.9999% paternal match. Jasmine sat heavily on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of 15 years of secrets. "I was going to tell you when you turned 18. "We're not upset," Justin assured her, his expression serious. "Actually, we're proud." "Proud?" "Of how you protected us," explained Jamal. "Of how you built all this by yourself. Of how you're going to show him exactly what he missed out on," finished Jordan with a smile that resembled his father's too closely for comfort. The following morning, as the private jet crossed the country, Jasmine mentally reviewed her keynote address, but her thoughts kept returning to Thomas. She had imagined this moment for years, the reunion, the recognition in his eyes, the realization of the monumental mistake he had made. But now, with the moment approaching, Jasmine discovered she didn't feel hatred. Not anymore. What she felt was something different, a tranquility that came from the certainty of her own worth, earned not through someone else's name but through her own merit. The Washington, D.C. Convention Center buzzed with America's legal elite, judges, attorneys, academics, all gathered for the National Conference on Jurisprudence. While her team checked final details, Jasmine adjusted her impeccable white blazer. "He's here," whispered her assistant. "Second row, right side." Jasmine didn't look. She didn't need to. In minutes, she would be on stage, and Thomas Hartwell would finally see her, not as the desperate pregnant waitress from 15 years ago, but as the woman who transformed American justice. Backstage, she heard the presenter's introduction. "Our keynote speaker today has revolutionized how we understand judicial fairness. Her artificial intelligence systems have been adopted by courts in 28 states, creating unprecedented transparency in sentencing patterns. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Wilcar Technologies, Jasmine Williams Carter." Walking onto the stage, Jasmine felt a curious sense of destiny. The lights momentarily blinded her, but as her vision adjusted, she scanned the audience. There in the second row sat Thomas Hartwell, his expression frozen in shock as recognition dawned. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "When I started my journey in legal technology, I was motivated by a simple question. How can we ensure that justice means the same thing for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status?" Thomas barely heard the words. His mind was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the powerful woman on stage with the frightened girl he had dismissed from his apartment 15 years before. Jasmine Williams, now Jasmine Williams Carter, CEO of a billion-dollar technology company, keynote speaker at a conference where he was merely a panelist. As she eloquently discussed algorithms that identified disparities in criminal sentencing, Thomas noticed the wedding ring on her left hand. Married, successful, respected. "Before we dive deeper into the data," Jasmine continued, "I'd like to introduce 3 extraordinary young men who have been essential to the development of our most recent algorithms. Please welcome my sons, Jordan, Jamal, and Justin Carter." The blood froze in Thomas's veins as 3 identical teenagers took the stage. 15 years old, above average height, skin lighter than Jasmine's but definitely biracial. And their faces. Thomas felt his stomach drop. It was like looking at a younger version of himself in the mirror, multiplied by 3. Justin took the microphone first. "Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to introduce our mother, who is not only a visionary in business but the most incredible example of strength and determination we know." Jordan continued, "Since we were small, she taught us that character and perseverance matter more than privilege or circumstance." Jamal concluded, looking directly at where Thomas sat. "A valuable lesson that our biological father unfortunately never understood when he abandoned our pregnant mother with triplets because he considered her unsuitable for his world." A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Thomas felt all eyes converging on him, though he knew it was impossible. Nobody here knew his connection to Jasmine. Nobody except the 4 people on stage. The rest of the presentation passed in a blur for Thomas. He watched, stunned, as Jasmine and the boys, his sons, demonstrated an AI system that analyzed judicial decisions for patterns of bias. The system that had revolutionized courts across the country. The system worth billions. When the presentation ended with a standing ovation, Thomas remained seated, unable to move. He watched as dozens of judges and attorneys surrounded Jasmine and the young men, offering congratulations and business cards. In the reception that followed, Thomas finally gathered courage to approach. Jasmine was conversing with the Attorney General when he interrupted. "Ms. Williams-Carter, fascinating presentation. Thomas Hartwell, Federal Court of Boston. Could I steal a moment of your time?" Jasmine turned slowly, her face a mask of professionalism. "Judge Hartwell, what a surprise. Certainly." They moved to a quieter corner of the hall. Thomas realized his hands were trembling. "So, triplets," he began pathetically. "Yes, Jordan specializes in algorithms. Jamal is our data analyst. Justin leads our social impact division." Jasmine spoke as if delivering a business report. "They're extraordinary." "They are." "Jasmine, I didn't know. If I had known—" "What?" she interrupted, her tone still perfectly controlled. "If you had known I would become CEO of a billion-dollar company, that our sons would be prodigies, that I would be invited to the same conference as you, not as a waitress serving coffee, but as the keynote speaker." Thomas swallowed hard. "I was young, ambitious, and stupid." "And now you're just stupid," she replied with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Funny how the unbearable burden now runs a company valued in billions, while you still seek validation from the same white men you were so eager to impress. The boys, do they know about me? They know everything, including your exact words that night." Thomas paled. "I would like to meet them, formally. Perhaps we could discuss some belated compensation." Jasmine laughed, a genuinely amused sound. "Compensation? Thomas? Each of them has a trust fund larger than your total net worth. What could you possibly offer?" Before Thomas could respond, Senator Mitchell, chair of the Judiciary Committee, approached with the 3 young men. "Jasmine, I've just informed your extraordinary sons. The president is absolutely delighted with your name for the next Supreme Court vacancy. The official nomination will be announced on Monday." Thomas felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. The Supreme Court. The dream he had pursued his entire career. The pinnacle that everyone in his family had aspired to for generations. And it would be occupied by Jasmine, the girl from Chicago's South Side whom he had deemed unsuitable for his world. "Judge Hartwell," said Justin, extending his hand, "I read your decision in Henderson versus State. Fascinating reasoning, though I disagree with your conclusions. You demonstrated a concerning lack of consideration for the defendant's socio-economic context. Perhaps because you lack personal experience with real adversity," added Jamal with a polite smile. "Or with abandonment," concluded Jordan. Thomas looked from one to another, seeing his own eyes, his own chin, his own forehead, but absolutely nothing of his character. "Boys," Jasmine called softly, "the senator is inviting us to dinner with the president's team. I believe our conversation with Judge Hartwell has concluded." She turned to Thomas one final time. 15 years ago, you told me I would be a burden to your legal career. Today, I'm about to be appointed to the Supreme Court while you will remain merely a footnote in jurisprudence textbooks. Life has an interesting sense of humor, doesn't it? While watching Thomas Hartwell crumble before her, Jasmine didn't know that upon her return to Washington for her Supreme Court confirmation hearing, she would face one final test, having to hear his testimony about her character and competence, a moment that would close the circle of her extraordinary journey. As Jasmine watched Thomas Hartwell crumble before her, a strange sense of emptiness replaced the vindication she'd anticipated for 15 years. His face, ashen and slack with shock, reflected the magnitude of his miscalculation. The man who had dismissed her as worthless now stood before her, diminished by the comparison between what he'd thrown away and what she'd built. "Jasmine!" Senator Mitchell called, breaking her reverie. "The car is waiting. The President's Chief of Staff is eager to begin dinner discussions." "Of course," she replied, turning away from Thomas without a backward glance. The Washington spring evening felt electric as Jasmine and her family settled into the government sedan. Michael squeezed her hand gently, a gesture that communicated everything words couldn't: pride, support, love. "So," Justin broke the silence, "that was our biological father." Jasmine studied her son's identical faces, searching for signs of distress. "Yes, I'm sorry you had to meet him that way." "Why?" Jordan asked, his expression surprisingly serene. "It was perfect, mathematically elegant even. The statistical probability of him being there to witness your Supreme Court nomination announcement was approximately 0.003%, Jamal added. "The universe occasionally delivers perfect symmetry." Michael laughed softly. "You've raised exceptional young men, Jasmine. They see justice in mathematics." The following morning dawned clear and crisp over the nation's capital. Jasmine woke early, watching the sunrise from her hotel suite as she prepared for what promised to be a momentous day. Her keynote had been delivered. The president's nomination was imminent. Yet she knew one loose thread remained. "The Washington Post is calling for comment," her assistant said when Jasmine answered her phone. "They're running a feature on your journey from single mother to Supreme Court nominee." "Tell them we'll provide a statement after the official announcement," Jasmine replied, watching her sons demolish room service pancakes at the suite's dining table. "And what's my schedule before the panel discussion?" "Actually, there's been a development. Judge Hartwell has withdrawn from his panel citing a sudden illness." Jasmine raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Cowardice was precisely what she would have expected. The convention center hummed with renewed energy as word of Jasmine's impending nomination spread through the legal community. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her the previous day now approached with effusive congratulations and business cards. "Supreme Court Justice Williams Carter," said Michael, adjusting her collar as they prepared to enter the main hall for the morning session, "has a magnificent ring to it." "It's not official yet," Jasmine cautioned, though her eyes sparkled. "Just a matter of time," he replied. "Although I suspect certain members of Boston's legal aristocracy are finding it difficult to swallow." Inside the packed auditorium, Jasmine noticed Thomas's empty seat in the judicial panel section. His absence felt like a final act of retreat, unable to face the woman he had so grievously underestimated. The morning sessions proceeded smoothly, with Jasmine fielding thoughtful questions about Wilcar's technology and its implications for judicial reform. The triplets sat in the front row, their attention unwavering despite having heard versions of this presentation countless times. During the lunch break, Jasmine stepped into a quiet corridor to review notes for her afternoon presentation. The unmistakable sound of expensive shoes on marble flooring alerted her to someone's approach. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Thomas's voice came from behind her. Jasmine turned slowly, studying the man who had once wielded such power over her emotions. His tailored suit, likely bespoke from the same Boston tailor his father had patronized, couldn't disguise the slight slouch of defeat in his shoulders. "Feeling better?" she asked neutrally. I heard you were indisposed. A temporary condition, he replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Brought on by unexpected developments. 15 years is hardly unexpected, Thomas. You've had plenty of time to prepare for the possibility of our paths crossing. He glanced down the hallway, ensuring their privacy. Not for this. Not for them. His voice caught. They're remarkable, Jasmine. Brilliant, articulate, confident. Yes, they are. They look like me. The wonder in his voice carried a note of possessiveness that immediately raised Jasmine's defenses. They look like themselves, she corrected. And they are who they are because of how they were raised, not because of whose DNA they carry. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. I have rights, legal rights. The cold fury that swept through Jasmine surprised her with its intensity. 15 years of peace with her past evaporated in an instant. Rights? She repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Let me remind you of your exact words, Judge Hartwell. You said I was an unbearable burden to your career. You said someone like me would never belong in your world. You offered me $5,000 to solve my problem and disappear. Thomas flinched at each quoted phrase. I was young and ambitious. And now you're neither young nor particularly impressive in your ambitions, Jasmine cut in. Whereas I've built something extraordinary, as have my sons, without your name, your money, or your alleged rights. Before Thomas could respond, Jordan appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression wary as he approached. Mom? The senator's looking for you. Something about a call from the White House. I'll be right there, Jasmine replied, never taking her eyes off Thomas. Jordan studied Thomas with clinical detachment. Judge Hartwell, I've been analyzing your judicial record for a research project. Your sentencing patterns show statistically significant bias against defendants of color. Did you know that? Thomas blanched. That's a serious accusation from someone your age. It's not an accusation, Jordan corrected with a precision that reminded Thomas eerily of himself. It's a mathematical observation. Will Carr's algorithm flagged your courtroom as being in the 95th percentile for racial sentencing disparities within the Boston Circuit. Jasmine placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. We should join the others, Jordan. As they turned to leave, Thomas called after them. I want to meet with all three, properly, as their father. Jordan stopped, turning slowly. You're not our father, Judge Hartwell. You're a statistical anomaly in our lives, present in our genetic code but absent from every moment that mattered. Our father is Michael Carter, the man who taught us how to ride bicycles, who attended every cello recital and math competition, who showed us how to treat women with respect. The precision of the blow left Thomas speechless. Jasmine and Jordan continued down the hallway, leaving him alone with the echo of truth. The afternoon sessions proceeded with heightened energy, rumors of Jasmine's nomination now circulating openly among attendees. As the final panel concluded, Senator Mitchell approached Jasmine with barely contained excitement. It's happening tonight, he whispered. The president wants to announce it at the state dinner. You and your family will be seated at the head table. The whirlwind of the next few hours, rushing back to the hotel, formal attire being delivered for the family, security briefings from White House staff, left little time for Jasmine to process her confrontation with Thomas. Only in the quiet moment before departure, as she fastened a pearl necklace Dorothy had given her for her 35th birthday, did Michael broach the subject. Jordan told me about the hallway conversation, he said, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror beside her. Are you concerned about Thomas attempting to assert paternal rights? Jasmine met his eyes in the reflection. He wouldn't dare. The publicity would destroy what's left of his reputation. Besides, the boys are 15, old enough for their preferences to carry significant legal weight. And they've made their preferences abundantly clear, Michael agreed, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. The White House glowed with golden light against the evening sky as their motorcade approached. Secret Service agents escorted them through side entrances, avoiding the press corps gathered at the main entrance. In a small antechamber, they met with the president's chief of staff, who briefed them on the evening's choreography. After the main course, the president will announce his intention to nominate Ms. Williams Carter, she explained. We expect unanimous Senate confirmation, given your broad support across the political spectrum. Jasmine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. From a shelter bed to the Supreme Court, a trajectory so improbable it defied all statistical modeling. As they entered the East Room, heads turned and conversations hushed. The triplets, resplendent in matching tuxedos, carried themselves with a confidence that belied their 15 years. Michael, distinguished in his formal wear, placed a protective hand at the small of Jasmine's back as they navigated the sea of power brokers and policymakers. Senator Mitchell met them halfway across the room, accompanied by a distinguished older man Jasmine recognized immediately, Justice Samuel Reynolds, whose seat on the Supreme Court she was being nominated to fill. Jasmine Williams Carter, the justice said, taking her hand in both of his. Your work has transformed our understanding of equitable justice. I can think of no one better to continue that mission from the bench. Before she could respond, a commotion at the room's entrance drew everyone's attention. Thomas Hartwell stood in the doorway, still wearing his conference attire, his expression a mixture of determination and desperation. How did he get past security? Michael murmured. A Secret Service agent approached Thomas, speaking in low tones. Thomas produced what appeared to be his judicial credentials, gesturing emphatically toward where Jasmine stood. I'll handle this, Senator Mitchell said, striding toward the disruption. Jasmine watched as Mitchell engaged Thomas in what appeared to be a heated exchange, eventually leading him to a side room away from the main gathering. The incident passed quickly, with most guests unaware of the drama unfolding. What was that about? Justin asked, appearing at Jasmine's side with a glass of sparkling water. Your biological donor making one last desperate attempt at relevance, Jasmine replied, keeping her voice light despite the tension coiling in her chest. 20 minutes later, Mitchell returned, his expression grim but satisfied. He's been escorted from the premises. Apparently, he came to assert his parental rights before the nomination was announced. I informed him that any such attempt would be met with the full legal resources of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thank you, Senator, Michael said. Don't mention it. The man's arrogance is astounding, thinking he could disrupt this historic moment with his belated paternal concerns. Mitchell shook his head in disgust. The president has been informed of the situation and remains unwavering in his support. The remainder of the evening proceeded like a dream sequence. The president's warm introduction, the standing ovation that greeted the announcement of her nomination, the sea of powerful faces looking at her with genuine respect. Later that night, as the family returned to their hotel, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your nomination. I apologize for my behavior earlier. They are extraordinary young men, and you've done what I never could have. No further disruptions. You have my word. T.H. Jasmine showed the message to Michael, who read it with raised eyebrows. Surprisingly gracious, considering. Too little, too late, Jasmine replied, deleting the message. The following morning, the Washington Post ran the headline everyone had been anticipating. Legal tech pioneer nominated to Supreme Court. The accompanying photograph showed Jasmine with her 3 sons standing beside the president in the Oval Office. Thomas stared at the image on his laptop screen in his hotel room, his hands trembling around a tumbler of whiskey. The conference continued, but Thomas canceled his participation in the remaining panels, citing a sudden illness. The true reason was his overwhelming fear of facing his peers after the silent humiliation he had suffered. Though no one else knew of his connection to Jasmine, Thomas felt as if every person at the conference could see through him. See the man who had abandoned a pregnant woman for considering her unsuitable, only to discover she had become one of the country's greatest success stories. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Colleagues from the court, his press agent, his ex-wife. Everyone wanted to know if he had connections to the new Supreme Court nominee, if he could introduce them. The irony was suffocating. 2 days later, Thomas found himself standing outside the building where Jasmine and the boys were staying, the Four Seasons Georgetown. He had sent countless messages, all unanswered. Now he was prepared to beg in person for a chance to speak with his sons. In the luxurious lobby, surprisingly, he encountered Jordan exiting the hotel gym. "Judge Hartwell," the young man said without surprise. "I figured you might show up eventually." "Jordan?" Thomas responded, his voice unsteady. "I'd like to talk. With you, your brothers, your mother, if possible." Jordan studied the man for a long moment. "You know, I spent years imagining this moment, what I would say to the man who abandoned my mother when she needed him most." Thomas swallowed hard. "And what would you say?" "Nothing," Jordan answered simply. "Absolutely nothing, because you mean nothing to us. You never have." While watching the Carter family enter the Capitol building the next day, Thomas Hartwell finally understood the true meaning of justice, not the kind dispensed from an elevated bench, but the kind manifested in the restored dignity of someone who refused to accept another's cruel verdict on their own worth. While watching the Carter family enter the Capitol building, Thomas Hartwell felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world crumbling beneath his feet. From his vantage point across the street, he observed Jasmine walking confidently up the marble steps, flanked by her 3 sons, his sons, and her husband, all of them radiating the easy solidarity of a family unit forged through love, rather than obligation. The Washington Post had published the article that morning. "Tech Pioneer Nominated for Supreme Court." The photo showed Jasmine with her 3 sons beside the president in the Oval Office. Thomas had stared at the image on his laptop screen in his hotel room, his hands trembling around his tumbler of whiskey. The conference continued without him. He'd canceled his participation in his panel, citing sudden illness. The real reason was his overwhelming fear of facing his peers after the silent humiliation he had suffered. Though no one else knew of his connection to Jasmine, Thomas felt exposed, as if every attendee could see through his judicial robes to the coward who had abandoned a pregnant woman for being unsuitable, only to watch her become one of the country's greatest success stories. His phone rang incessantly, colleagues from the court, his press agent, his ex-wife. Everyone wanted to know if he had connections to the new Supreme Court nominee, if he could introduce them. The irony was suffocating. Thomas retreated to the bar of his hotel, ordering another bourbon neat. The television above the bar played continuous coverage of Jasmine's nomination, political analysts speculating on the historic nature of her appointment, the first black woman with a technology background to be nominated to the highest court. "Her story is remarkable," said one commentator. "A single mother of triplets who went from homeless shelter to billionaire tech CEO, all while revolutionizing the legal system." Thomas drained his glass, the alcohol doing nothing to numb the hollow ache in his chest. He had rejected Jasmine for fear she would be a burden to his career, yet here she was, ascending to a position he could only dream of, the pinnacle that 3 generations of Hartwells had aspired to but never achieved. The next morning, despite the throbbing in his temples from too much bourbon, Thomas found himself standing outside the Four Seasons Georgetown where Jasmine and her family were staying. He had sent countless messages, all unanswered. Now he was prepared to beg in person for a chance to speak with his sons. In the luxurious lobby, surprisingly, he encountered Jordan exiting the hotel gym, a towel draped around his neck. "Judge Hartwell," the young man said without surprise. "I figured you might show up eventually." "Jordan," Thomas responded, his voice unsteady. "I'd like to talk. With you, your brothers, your mother, if possible." Jordan studied him for a long moment, his analytical gaze eerily reminiscent of Thomas's own father. "You know, I spent years imagining this moment. What I would say to the man who abandoned my mother when she needed him most." Thomas swallowed hard. "And what would you say?" "Nothing," Jordan answered simply. "Absolutely nothing, because you mean nothing to us. You never have." The brutal honesty delivered in such a measured tone felt like a physical blow. "They're my sons," Thomas protested weakly. "My blood." "DNA doesn't make a father," Jordan replied, his composure unshaken. "The man who taught us to ride bicycles, who attended every recital and math competition, who showed us how to treat women with respect, that's our father, Michael Carter. He married our mother when we were 5 and legally adopted us." Thomas felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "You have an adoptive father?" "We have a father," Jordan corrected, "and he's everything you never were. Literature professor at Stanford, published author, volunteer in literacy programs for underprivileged communities. A man who saw our mother's value when she was still struggling to finish college while raising us." At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and the other 2 young men emerged, accompanied by a middle-aged black man with thick-framed glasses and a gentle smile. Michael Carter looked exactly the opposite of Thomas, less polished, more authentic. "Mr. Hartwell," Michael greeted with a polite nod. "The boys told me about your encounter." Thomas stood speechless. This was the man who had raised his biological children, who had shared their lives, who had witnessed every important milestone. "Mr. Carter, No need to say anything," Michael interrupted gently. "What happened between you and Jasmine was long ago. But understand one thing, these are my sons. I was present for every fever, every nightmare, every school competition. You may share DNA with them, but I share their lives." Justin and Jamal remained silent, observing the man they had never known, who had never wanted them. "Do you hate me?" Thomas finally asked, his voice breaking. Justin sighed. "Hate requires emotional investment, and frankly, you don't deserve that energy. But the way you spoke to me at the conference, clearly there's resentment." "What you saw wasn't resentment," explained Jamal. "It was poetic justice. The woman you discarded as unsuitable for your world is about to occupy a position you could only dream of reaching. That's not revenge. It's simply the universe working as it should." At that moment, Jasmine appeared in the lobby, surprise registering on her face when she saw Thomas with her family. "What's happening here?" she asked, her voice firm. Michael put his arm around her waist. "Mr. Hartwell was just leaving, darling." Thomas looked at the family before him, the woman he had abandoned, now radiant with confidence and success, the man who had assumed the responsibility he had rejected, the 3 extraordinary young men who carried his genes but nothing of his moral legacy. "Jasmine," he tried one last time, "I'm not asking to be part of their lives. I just want them to know." "They already know everything they need to about you," she interrupted, "and they've moved on. I suggest you do the same." The dismissal was as decisive as his had been 15 years ago, yet infinitely more dignified. Thomas nodded, understanding that this door was permanently closed. "Congratulations on your nomination," he said quietly. "It's well deserved." As Thomas walked away, Michael turned to his family. "The car's waiting. We have that meeting with the Judiciary Committee staff." In the limousine heading toward the Capitol, Jasmine sat surrounded by her family, a sense of completion washing over her. The confrontation with Thomas had lacked the dramatic catharsis she might once have imagined, but that in itself was telling. He had become irrelevant, a footnote in her extraordinary journey rather than a defining chapter. "Are you okay?" Michael asked quietly, taking her hand. "Better than okay," she replied. "I feel free." The Senate Judiciary Committee offices occupied a stately section of the Hart Building. As their family was escorted to the chairman's conference room, staffers and senators alike stopped to watch their passage, many offering quiet congratulations to Jasmine. Senator Mitchell greeted them warmly, introducing his chief counsel who would be coordinating the confirmation process. "We're anticipating a smooth confirmation," the senator assured them. "Your support crosses party lines, which is practically unheard of these days." As the meeting progressed, Covering the grueling schedule of interviews, background checks, and hearings that awaited her, Jasmine found her thoughts drifting to Thomas. Not with anger or resentment, but with a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun in that Chicago penthouse 15 years ago was finally closing. "There is one unusual request," Senator Mitchell said, drawing Jasmine back to the present. "Judge Hartwell from the Boston Circuit has volunteered to testify at your confirmation hearing." Michael's posture stiffened. "To what end?" "Surprisingly, in support," Mitchell replied, checking his notes. He specifically asked to address the efficacy of Will Carr's judicial analysis systems in identifying and correcting sentencing disparities. Jasmine exchanged glances with her sons, each registering the same thought. Thomas was seeking redemption through public endorsement. "That's fine," she said calmly. "His testimony will be valuable, given his position." After the meeting, as they walked through the Capitol Rotunda, Michael pulled her aside. "Are you sure about Hartwell testifying? It seems like he's trying to insert himself into your moment." "Let him," Jasmine replied. "His endorsement will carry weight with traditional judges, and that's a demographic I'll need to win over. Besides," she added with a small smile, "there's a certain poetry in having him publicly affirm my qualifications for a position he never dreamed I could achieve." The next morning, as Jasmine prepared for a series of meetings with individual senators, her phone chimed with a notification. A news alert featured Thomas giving an interview outside the conference venue. "I've had the opportunity to see firsthand how Will Carr's analytical systems have transformed our understanding of judicial fairness," Thomas was saying, his expression earnest. "Ms. Williams Carter's nomination represents a watershed moment for the court. Someone who understands both the human and technological dimensions of modern justice." "He's trying to align himself with your success," Justin observed, reading over her shoulder. "Trying to rewrite history," Jamal added. "Statistically predictable behavior for someone facing irrelevance," Jordan concluded. Michael shook his head. "The audacity is almost impressive." Jasmine closed the notification, unmoved by Thomas's transparent attempt to position himself as a champion of her nomination. "He's not worth our energy," she said simply. "We have more important matters to focus on." The following week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Jasmine met with former clerks, studied recent court opinions, and underwent mock confirmation hearings arranged by the White House counsel's office. The triplets returned to San Francisco to resume school, with plans to return for the actual hearing. On the evening before the preliminary hearing, Jasmine was reviewing briefing materials in her hotel suite when a hotel staff member delivered an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Jasmine, tomorrow I will testify that you are the most qualified nominee in memory. It is the truth, though I was too blind to see your potential 15 years ago. I do not seek forgiveness or relationship, merely to acknowledge that your extraordinary journey deserves recognition and that my earlier judgment was catastrophically wrong. Thomas." She showed the note to Michael, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "What do you make of it?" "A man facing the consequences of his actions," Jasmine replied, setting the note aside. "Too late to matter." The confirmation hearing room buzzed with anticipation the next morning. Cameras from every major network were positioned to capture what was expected to be a historic nomination process. Jasmine, elegant in a navy suit, sat calmly at the witness table as senators delivered opening statements. When Thomas was called to testify in the afternoon session, a curious hush fell over the room. Few knew of his personal connection to the nominee. To most, he was simply a respected federal judge offering an assessment of her qualifications. "Judge Hartwell," began Senator Mitchell, "you've worked with Ms. Williams Carter's analytical systems in your court. Could you explain the impact they've had on your judicial practice?" Thomas cleared his throat, his gaze briefly meeting Jasmine's before addressing the committee. "When Will Carr's system was first implemented in my circuit, I was skeptical. perhaps even hostile to the idea that an algorithm could identify patterns in judicial decision-making that human oversight had missed. He paused, a flash of what might have been humility crossing his features. I was wrong. The system revealed disparities in my own sentencing decisions that I had never consciously recognized, patterns showing that defendants of color received sentences 42% more severe than white defendants in comparable circumstances. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as Thomas continued. But more significantly, Ms. Williams-Carter's work has demonstrated something profound about human potential. In creating these systems, she has shown that our preconceptions about who belongs in which rooms of power, who has the capacity for transformative thinking, are not just morally wrong but intellectually bankrupt. His eyes found Jasmine's again, this time holding her gaze. There is no one more qualified for the highest court in our land than someone who has experienced both the failure and triumph of our justice system firsthand. Someone who has transformed that experience into technology that makes us all more accountable to our highest ideals of equal justice under law. As Thomas finished his testimony, Jasmine maintained her composed expression, though inwardly she acknowledged the small measure of growth his words represented. It wasn't forgiveness she felt. Some wounds ran too deep for that, but perhaps a recognition that even Thomas Hartwell was capable of learning, however belatedly. The hearing concluded for the day with analysts predicting overwhelming confirmation. As Jasmine gathered her materials, she noticed Thomas lingering near the exit. Their eyes met briefly across the chamber. No words needed, no further confrontation required. The ledger between them would never be balanced, but perhaps it could finally be closed. That evening, as Jasmine and Michael prepared for a dinner with Supreme Court Justice Elena Martinez, her phone buzzed with messages from the Triplets. Watched the hearing online. Judge H actually sounded sincere. Jordan. Statistical analysis of his facial expressions and vocal patterns suggests 89% probability of genuine remorse. Jamal. Still don't want him in our lives, but maybe he's not a complete monster. Justin Jasmine smiled at their assessments. Her sons, raised with both brilliant minds and compassionate hearts, could recognize human complexity even in the man who had rejected them before birth. The boys seemed to be processing things well, she told Michael as they rode the elevator down to the hotel lobby. You gave them the foundation to judge character accurately, Michael replied, and the security to form those judgments without fear. As the elevator doors opened, Jasmine was surprised to find Thomas waiting in the lobby, standing awkwardly with his hands in his pockets. "One more ambush?" she asked, her voice cool but not hostile. "More of a final word," Thomas replied. "May I speak with you? Just for a moment?" Michael looked to Jasmine, who nodded slightly. "I'll wait by the entrance," he said, squeezing her hand before walking away. Thomas watched Michael's retreating figure. "He's a good man." "The best," Jasmine confirmed. "I want to thank you," Thomas said, surprising her, "for allowing me to testify today. You could have blocked it. Your testimony carried weight with the conservative wing of the committee." "That wasn't why I did it." He hesitated. "I did it because it was true. You are extraordinary, and those boys," his voice caught, "those extraordinary young men deserve to see their mother recognized for what she is." "They already know what I am," Jasmine replied. "They didn't need your validation, and neither did I." Thomas nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Of course." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "This isn't money. It's just, I had my assistant compile photographs from my childhood and adolescence, medical history too, in case the boys ever want it, for curiosity or health reasons." Jasmine took the envelope, touched despite herself by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll give it to them when they're ready." As she turned to join Michael, Thomas spoke once more. "You were never the burden, Jasmine. My own prejudice and ambition were. I've spent 15 years climbing a ladder only to discover you built an elevator to the top." Without responding, Jasmine walked away, leaving Thomas Hartwell standing alone in the hotel lobby, just as he had left her standing alone 15 years earlier. But unlike him, she left with dignity rather than cruelty, with completion rather than callousness. While holding the Constitution during the swearing-in ceremony, Jasmine Williams Carter, the waitress from Chicago's South Side who was deemed unsuitable for the elite world, hadn't merely entered that world, she had redefined it, proving that true justice isn't just what one decrees from an elevated bench, but what one builds through perseverance, integrity, and an unshakable belief in one's own worth. 2 months after the confrontation in the Georgetown Hotel lobby, Washington, D.C. transformed itself for Jasmine's confirmation hearing. Cherry blossoms painted the Capitol in delicate pink, a fitting backdrop for what many were already calling a historic nomination. News vans lined Constitution Avenue, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems. Inside the Hart Senate office building, staffers rushed through marble corridors, preparing for the spectacle that would unfold in room 220. Jasmine stood at her hotel window watching the early morning light catch the dome of the Capitol. Her white suit, custom-tailored Chanel, lay prepared on the bed, a stark contrast to the faded maternity dress she'd worn when Thomas had cast her out 15 years before. "The car will be here in 30 minutes, Michael said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The boys texted. They landed safely and are headed straight to the hearing room with Dorothy. Jasmine nodded, her expression contemplative. "I just received the final witness list from Senator Mitchell's office. Thomas is scheduled for the afternoon session." Michael paused, studying his wife's reflection. "How do you feel about that?" "Surprisingly calm," she answered. "There's a certain symmetry to it. The man who once deemed me unworthy now having to publicly affirm my qualifications for the highest court in the land." The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Camera crews jockeyed for position as senators arranged their papers and staffers whispered last-minute advice. In the front row of public seating, the triplets sat beside Michael, all four in impeccably tailored suits. Despite turning 15 just months earlier, the boys carried themselves with the poise of young men twice their age. Beside them sat Dorothy, now 73, her health fragile but her determination to witness this moment unshakable. "All rise," announced the committee clerk as the senators entered, led by Chairman Mitchell. Once they had taken their seats, he spoke into his microphone. "Today, the Senate Judiciary Committee begins confirmation hearings for Jasmine Williams Carter, nominated by President Elaine Richardson to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Ms. Williams Carter, please rise and take the oath." Jasmine stood, her posture perfect, her hand raised as she swore to tell the truth. For the next 3 hours, she fielded questions with measured precision, her judicial philosophy, her understanding of constitutional principles, her vision of the court's role in American democracy. "Ms. Williams Carter," said Senator Blackburn, a conservative known for his tough questioning, "critics suggest your background in technology rather than traditional legal practice leaves gaps in your qualifications. How do you respond?" "Senator, I would argue that my background brings valuable perspective to the court," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "The intersection of technology and law is perhaps the most critical frontier in modern jurisprudence. The founders couldn't have imagined digital privacy concerns or algorithmic bias, yet we must apply constitutional principles to these realities. My work has always been about ensuring that our most fundamental values, equal protection, due process, fairness, translate effectively into the digital age." By the lunch recess, even conservative commentators were acknowledging her command of legal principles and unflappable demeanor. As the committee broke for an hour, Jasmine joined her family in a private room reserved for the nominee. "You're crushing it, Mom," Jordan said, offering a high five. "Statistically speaking, your responses have demonstrated superior legal reasoning compared to 87% of previous nominees," added Jamal. Justin, always the most perceptive of the three, noticed the slight tension around his mother's eyes. You're thinking about his testimony, aren't you? Jasmine nodded. I've spent 15 years building a life completely separate from Thomas Hartwell. Now he'll be part of my official record forever. A footnote, Michael corrected, squeezing her hand. Nothing more. When the hearing resumed, Chairman Mitchell announced the afternoon's first witness. The committee calls Judge Thomas Hartwell of the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Thomas was known as a conservative jurist, and few expected him to support Jasmine's nomination. He approached the witness table with measured steps, his tailored suit and carefully knotted tie projecting the image of judicial gravitas. Judge Hartwell, began Senator Mitchell, you've requested to testify regarding Ms. Williams-Carter's nomination. Please proceed. Thomas adjusted the microphone, his eyes briefly meeting Jasmine's across the room before addressing the committee. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, distinguished senators, I appear before you today as someone with unique perspective on both the nominee's character and the transformative impact of her work. He paused, seemingly gathering himself. The Wilcar Judicial Analytics platform was implemented in my circuit 4 years ago, despite my initial skepticism. I believed then, as many judges did, that algorithmic analysis of sentencing patterns represented an intrusion into judicial discretion. Thomas's voice strengthened as he continued. That skepticism was rooted in pride, and perhaps something deeper, a resistance to having one's decisions examined for patterns one might not consciously recognize. When the initial analysis revealed statistically significant disparities in my own sentencing history, specifically that defendants of color received sentences averaging 42% longer than white defendants for equivalent crimes, my first reaction was denial. A murmur rippled through the committee room. Thomas was admitting to biased sentencing on national television, an extraordinary moment of judicial self-reflection. Over time, however, the data proved impossible to dismiss. Ms. Williams-Carter's system didn't just identify the problem, it offered a framework for correction. By providing real-time comparative analysis during sentencing considerations, it allows judges to check our unconscious biases before they become enshrined in someone's permanent record. Thomas straightened slightly, his gaze now moving between the senators and Jasmine. But beyond the technical merits of her work, I wish to address a more fundamental point about Ms. Williams-Carter's qualifications for the Supreme Court. In the front row, the triplets tensed simultaneously. Michael placed a protective hand on Jordan's shoulder. Throughout American history, Thomas continued, we have often confused privilege with potential. We have mistaken the circumstances of one's birth or education for a measurement of their capacity. I have been guilty of this error in judgment, personally and professionally. His voice caught slightly on the word personally, a subtle tell that only those who knew their history would recognize. What Ms. Williams-Carter has demonstrated throughout her career is not just brilliance, but a profound understanding of justice as lived experience. She has approached legal technology not as an academic exercise, but as a means to deliver on our constitutional promise of equal protection under law. Thomas's testimony continued for another 20 minutes, delving into specific cases where Wilcar's analytics had revealed systemic patterns of inequality. Throughout, he maintained professional distance, never directly acknowledging his personal connection to Jasmine or the triplets. Until Senator Garcia, a shrewd former prosecutor, asked the question hovering unspoken in the room. Judge Hartwell, your advocacy for the nominee seems unusually passionate. Is there a personal connection we should be aware of? A heavy silence fell over the hearing room. In the front row, Justin instinctively reached for his brother's hands. Michael's posture stiffened. Dorothy leaned forward, her aged eyes sharp with protective concern. Thomas paused, visibly weighing his response. Jasmine's expression remained impassive, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Senator, Thomas finally answered, I believe in giving credit where it's due. Ms. Williams-Carter's work has fundamentally improved our judicial system. My enthusiasm stems from having witnessed that improvement firsthand." It was a careful non-answer that respected the boundaries Jasmine had established. The senator, perhaps sensing a story but unable to extract it, moved on to other questions. When Thomas concluded his testimony, he gathered his notes with deliberate movements, avoiding eye contact with the front row as he exited through a side door. The remainder of the afternoon brought a parade of witnesses, legal scholars, technology experts, civil rights leaders, all testifying to Jasmine's qualifications. By 5 o'clock, when Chairman Mitchell gavelled the session closed, the consensus among political observers was clear. Jasmine Williams Carter would be confirmed with bipartisan support. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed around Jasmine and her family, cameras flashing as they made their way toward the exit. Dorothy, moving slowly with her cane, beamed with pride as she watched the woman she had once found sobbing in a shelter now answer questions about her vision for the Supreme Court. As they approached their waiting car, a Senate aide hurried toward them. "Ms. Williams Carter, Judge Hartwell asked if he might speak with you privately. He's waiting in Conference Room B if you're willing." Jasmine exchanged glances with Michael, who nodded slightly. "I'll come with you," he offered. "No," she replied. "I think this is something I need to do alone. Take the boys and Dorothy back to the hotel. I won't be long." The conference room was small, with a polished oak table and portraits of past judiciary chairmen lining the walls. Thomas stood when she entered, his posture stiff with formality. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Your testimony was effective," Jasmine acknowledged, remaining near the door. "The committee was impressed." "I meant every word." Thomas hesitated, "though I left some words unsaid." "That was appropriate," Jasmine replied. "Our personal history has no bearing on my qualifications." Thomas nodded, then reached into his briefcase, removing a sealed envelope. "I had my attorney prepare this. It's a formal acknowledgement of paternity and an irrevocable waiver of any parental rights or claims. I want you to have legal certainty that I will never disrupt your family." Jasmine accepted the envelope, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." "There's something else." Thomas produced a second, thicker envelope. "This contains information about the Hartwell family medical history going back 3 generations. The boys should have it, for their records." Another moment of unexpected consideration. Jasmine added it to the first envelope. "I'll make sure they receive it." They stood in awkward silence, 15 years of history suspended between them. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I've spent my career interpreting justice, Jasmine, but I never truly understood it until I saw you walk into that conference hall 2 months ago. Justice isn't just what we decree from elevated benches. It's sometimes what the universe delivers through the triumph of those we underestimated." Jasmine studied him. This man who had once held such power over her emotions, now diminished not by failure but by comparison to what she had built without him. "You know what the cruelest part was, Thomas? Not the abandonment itself, but your certainty of my worthlessness. You didn't just reject me. You judged me incapable of greatness. I was catastrophically wrong," he admitted, "about you, about the boys, about what constitutes true value in a person." "Yes," Jasmine agreed simply. "You were." She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. "The boys are extraordinary, Thomas. Not because they share your DNA, but because they've been raised by a man who shows them daily what integrity and responsibility look like. Michael has been their father in every way that matters." Thomas nodded, accepting this final truth. "I never deserved them. Or you." "No," Jasmine confirmed. "You didn't." 2 weeks later, on a crystalline spring morning, Jasmine stood in the East Conference Room of the Supreme Court, her hand resting on a Bible held by Michael. Chief Justice Abernathy administered the oath as her sons watched with undisguised pride, Dorothy dabbing at tears beside them. "I, Jasmine Williams Carter, do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States under the Constitution and laws of the United States, so help me God." The small audience, including her fellow justices, erupted in applause. Photographers captured the historic moment as Jasmine embraced her family, her black robe a powerful symbol of how far she had traveled from that Chicago apartment 15 years ago. Later that evening, at a private celebration in their Washington townhouse, purchased in anticipation of their new bi-coastal life, the family gathered in the living room, glasses raised. "To Justice Williams Carter," Michael toasted, his eyes shining with pride. "To Mom," the triplets chorused. Dorothy, frail but determined to witness this moment, added softly, "To justice itself, which sometimes takes its time, but always arrives." As Jasmine sipped her champagne, she felt a sense of completion that transcended mere professional achievement. The journey from that heartbreaking night in Chicago to this triumphant evening in Washington represented more than career advancement. It was the vindication of her fundamental worth as a human being. While holding the Constitution during the swearing-in ceremony, Jasmine Williams Carter, the waitress from Chicago's South Side who was deemed unsuitable for the elite world, hadn't merely entered that world, she had redefined it, proving that true justice isn't just what one decrees from an elevated bench, but what one builds through perseverance, integrity, and an unshakable belief in one's own worth. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.